Hey, huge welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. My name is Rich Steve Beck. I'm the founder of this community, and welcome to our next guest, which is Mr. David Kalmusky from sunny Nashville. So to give you some background about David, so he's done well over 100 albums. David's body of work includes Juno awarded, Canadian Grammy, CCMA awarded, top 10 charting, USA Billboard, number ones, Grammy nominated and gold platinum selling. So he's worked with artists such as Shawn Mendes, Keith Urban, Motley Crue, John Legend, amongst many, many others, including The Fray as well. So without further ado, from Nashville, Mr. David Kalmusky. Hey, David, how you doing?
Good, Rich. How are you doing?
Really, really good, man. Really, really good.
I love your intros. They're very, I just feel like I'm on a Hollywood blockbuster or something.
That's a good start. Good start. I'm loving your studio. Absolutely stunning. We've got to have a chat about this later.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're going to try to do a walkthrough. This is one wall of many.
Amazing. Absolutely fantastic. So like with the rest of the guests that we've talked to, which have been very honored and blessed, and thank you, David, as well for joining us today. We're going to start at the beginning of your journey. So when you first started off getting into music. So tell us, what music were you listening to as a kid back in the day?
Well, my grandfather played saxophone for a living, and my father was a bass player, engineer, session guy, live touring musician his entire life. And I grew up in the, I grew up in the 70s listening to everything that they created in the 60s. My father was the original bass player for the Hawks with, Levon Helm back in the 50s and 60s. And so I grew up listening to the band and actually meeting them and as family friends and hanging around backstage with all of the acts and bands my father played with. We had a studio in the back of our house where everyone would play and record and rehearse. And so I basically grew up in this very environment. I really never, I understand how privileged that is to never really need to make a choice. By the time I was, 6 or 7 years old, I wasn't asking for toy cars. I wanted reel-to-reel tape recorders and microphones and guitars, and my room was full of it. And I was overdubbing and sound on sound and playing with tape echo and stuff in my bedroom as early as 6 or 7 years old, and listening to a lot of my father's generation music, the things that he was listening to from probably the age of 0 to just give me a second. 0 to 10 years old was a lot of Ray Charles, Jimi Hendrix, the band, just a mix of what became Americana and folk rock, and then what they called acid rock back then, which is just just rock and roll now, classic rock. And then I started to develop my own tastes and sort of go into my own musical journeys. By the around 10 or 11 years old, I discovered Black Sabbath, and stuff that my father's generation wasn't really into. And I transitioned through my teen years into discovering Peter Gabriel and the Police and sort of pop 80s progressive music. And I always had a really wide palette. I'd listen to everything from classical music, and I had the Charlie Parker Gold collection. I listened to a lot of Coltrane and Charlie Parker, as well as Black Sabbath and Frank Zappa and modern pop music. I was, I really got into a lot of the stuff David Bowie was putting out to radio, like Let's Dance with Nile Rodgers on guitar. And I've always been, influenced by great music. I didn't really follow a genre. I wasn't a jazzer or a metalhead or a pop, person. And I think that's followed me my entire career. I make to date, in the last couple of years, I've made a few jazz records, a few progressive records, some metal, some pop, some country, some Americana, blues. And, Nashville is such a music rich city with so many different influences.
Yeah.
And it was pretty natural for me to be able to come here as a musician, as a guitar player. I had a lot of styles. I wasn't stylistically a blues player. I was definitely a session man. And so I was able to play effectively on pop music, on country music, on heavy rock. And that has just kept the palette really wide the whole time.
Yeah. That's incredible. So I understand as well then when you were growing up, so obviously your dad was influencing you, but then am I right in saying that you left home when you were 16? Is that right?
I did, yeah.
Start touring?
Actually, when I was 15, I tried, but I didn't want to get my parents were good parents, but the truancy officers and social service workers didn't see it that way necessarily. If a 15-year-old was, skipping school and going on the road, so I didn't want to cause too much trouble. But I was playing full time as much as possible when I was 15, and then literally on my 16th birthday, I jumped in a truck and went on the road for a decade.
Wow.
And just traveled, playing covers in clubs, hooking up with a couple of recording acts once in a while, and doing a few more higher profile things, but really honestly sort of more journeyman, under the radar, jobbing guitarist, musician, living on the road, playing clubs around the States and Canada, mostly in the early years.
Yeah. That's amazing. Incredible. So tell us about some of the stories while you're on the road. Any fun stories that you can think of?
I don't think I'm allowed to. I don't know. It's actually, man, if we go down that road, we're gonna spend 2 hours on road stories.
Sure.
I'll talk about the evolution musically of like how I found anchors and sort of kept evolving and reinventing myself every couple of years.
Right.
I wouldn't spin my wheels if I was in a band as a guitarist making pretty crappy money playing clubs, and a better band wanted me, to come join up with them and do sound from the side of the stage and play guitar and road manage, and I could make double salary or something better. I would just always sort of skip my way up the ladder. And there really came a point where I had such an upbringing sitting at a console, having recording gear in my bedroom, being, in and out of the studio. I also took my 15-year-old band to a recording studio that was close to where I grew up. We looked in the yellow pages and it was the only recording studio within 100 miles. And my mom drove us up for the weekend. And the studio owner, Bill Knapp at Canada Sound Recordings, offered me a house engineer gig to run his studio when I was 15.
Wow.
So between playing live gigs and spending weekends up there, it's kind of running the studio and then making some recordings with those acts, I joined some bands with some people that were in their 20s and 30s while I was 15, and really got into the culture of recording. And really missed that the whole time I was on the road, living in a van, playing in clubs. I would, I had a hot plate for cooking macaroni and ramen noodles in the room, and a 4-track. And I would literally just write songs in the room and practice guitar and overdub and just kind of record in hotel rooms the whole time I was out there. And when I'd land back in my home territory, I'd always find myself back in the studio.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted that. I wanted to evolve into that, and I didn't really quite know how to. I wasn't getting the invitation necessarily to do that. So I did what I knew, which was pick up more guitar gigs and work. And I'd watch TV, and it was up in Canada, so our country music video channel in the country bars was the New Country Network, and then our MTV was Much Music, and they'd be playing in all the bars, and I'd notice some of the Canadian acts and just figure, like, man, how can I get in with those people? How can I get in the studio and make records with bands that, tour and have videos and make original music? And I really just kind of did some research and found some musical pockets of scenes of music that I liked happening. And one of them was out of Kitchener, Ontario. There was a studio, Cedar Tree. Rick Hutt was a big Canadian record producer. And when I landed in Kitchener, I really just started to focus, and I got picked up by a few of these recording acts as their live guitar player. And then from there, invited into the studio. And from there, I would, take artists into the studio to demo stuff. And I would work 50 times harder than any human being ever worked on a demo. I mean, I would try to do masters, and just kind of, I loved it. I really wanted to really focus and evolve my life into that kind of work. So I was handing in demos that artists were sort of falling in love with, and a few of them started to put those demos on records and buy me out and turn them into masters and pay off the musicians that played on the demos. And then some of that stuff started to land on the charts, and my life for maybe the second decade of my career was always being in a band, and being the guitar player, being the road manager, and the record producer. And I would go into the studio with a band, and I was with, an artist in Canada named Jason McCoy. I was with a band briefly called the Road Hammers. I was in a band called the Wilkinsons that became the Small Town Pistols. Yep. And sort of the whole MO for about a decade was I made the record with the band as a co-creator, collaborator, and then we go out on the road and tour it for a year or two, And so I was only making 1 or 2 records a year. And then enter Nashville. When I poked my head into Nashville to make a record, I got invited to make 2 or 3 more, while I was here. And then eventually, I was making 5 or 6 or 8 records in a single year, and I couldn't tour with 5, 6, or 8 bands. So I turned everybody down, and I kind of retired from the road, and filled the rest of my time as a session guitar player, just playing on demos. I wasn't getting offered to play on other people's masters quite yet in my career. But I was making my own masters, mostly for Canadian artists. And then a few American artists started to step in, and it just evolved. And the 10 years that I've spent in Nashville have turned into the recording career that I've had in the last 10 years, which is a lot of the stuff in my intro and the studio that we're sitting in, and sort of an evolution of staying put, keeping my head down, and focusing on this rather than hopping on a plane. And, when I first moved to Nashville, I thought I moved to Nashville, but I was flying here 3 to 5 days a month just to hang out. But wow. I guess I stopped leaving Nashville about 10 years ago. And that's when you arrive, is when you have no departure plans.
Incredible. We will hear some amazing stories about Nashville. Excuse me. And in Nashville, is it true that maybe 1 in 8 people out of the population of musicians, would you say? I know you can't really put a number on it, but what would be your guess?
I'd say that sounds about accurate. It's Music City. There really is, and more and more. I've been in the industry a long time. I've collected friends all over the globe, and a lot of those friends are living and working out in Nashville now. I used to spend a lot of time working in LA or San Francisco or New York, and divide my time in the early years of working in Nashville. And a lot of those colleagues and clients moved here. They're here. I'm traveling less and less. I mean, during COVID, obviously, I haven't really left town in a year and a half. I think I'm just going to go work in New York, just on anything, just to go get out of here, Yeah. But yeah, Music City, it really is everything. This city is not just musicians, but it's full of engineers and songwriters and some of the greatest gear inventors and tech, audio tech. And it really is, if you want to do this for a living, there's no other city in the world like it. It's not really a small town anymore, but I'm still going to call it a small town. Yeah. This little district of Berry Hill that my studio's in, that I also live in, it just feels like little Mayberry. They're little cottages. We have our own little police department and city hall. It's kind of nestled away in the center of the city, and the tourists don't necessarily know about it. And there are so many great record makers just within a stone's throw of this building. You know, Vance Powell and Mitch Dane have Sputnik down the street, and Peter Frampton's our neighbor with his studio Fool on the Hill, and Universal, which is the old House of Blues, which is 4 rooms, is 2 doors down. Blackbird is about 7 doors down. And, you know, Westlake Audio is across the street. Vintage King is half a block up. This whole neighborhood is probably the coolest, most concentrated studio neighborhood, I think, in the world. I don't think there's another neighborhood like this anywhere.
I think you're right. I know I'm based here in Manchester, and I know that the studios in Manchester are dotted all over the place. And London is the same. There must be somewhere in London where there's a few studios quite close by, but again, the studios are quite far apart. So it's really interesting that you said that where you are, all the studios are quite compact and quite close together.
Yeah, and it's a small town culture, and all the musicians know each other, and all the engineers know each other, and really amazing things happen with a moment's notice. You know, I love some of the stories, you know, of working with an artist and us deciding to just walk out the front door and walk up to the cafe at the end of the street. And as we're walking by Universal, which was House of Blues at the time, my friend Alyssa, who I was working with, said, "Man, can you imagine Dan Dugmore on steel guitar on this?" And I was on this song we were working on it, and I was like, "Yeah, that's the right call." And just as I said that, Dan's walking out of Universal, and I go, "Dan, do you got a 2 o'clock?" And he said, "No." I said, "You do now." And he just walked 3 doors down and set up. And when we came back from lunch, he was set up and on the session. You know, it's really it's kind of it's a community. It really is, and everybody is helpful, and it's not. I've lived in a lot of different places and tried to work in a lot of different circles, and Nashville I can truly say is the first, you know, unconditionally supportive community. If people like you and they like your work, they'll go to bat for you rather than try to keep you from stealing their gig or their clients or something. I don't know. I feel like it's just fruitful enough here where I have mix engineers throwing me work where they know once I start working with a client, just the common, you know, nature of that thing. If I do a good job, they've lost a client, and now I'm mixing records for that artist. That didn't seem to happen in a lot of other scenes that I was in. And in Nashville, I have, you know, great guitar players referring me for sessions. I have, you know, engineers referring me for tracking work and mixing work. And then I obviously do the same. You know, I've grown up in this culture, so I pay it forward. And when I recognize talent and hard work, whether it's in an intern or an assistant engineer, I make sure that in my world, they get opportunities to advance and sort of step forward. That's the thing I feel that is pretty unique to Nashville, is that it's pretty genuine. There's a lot of good vibes amongst everybody. And of course, there's bad apples everywhere. And there's sort of an infiltration of people who are in their own circles and protective of it. I mean, that exists everywhere. But I think that the common experience here is that I've been given a lot of opportunities to step up. And when I work hard and I, you know, provide some level of mastery, then I've got a better career, you know,
Absolutely.
out of it.
Completely. So how many initially, when you were starting out in studios full time, how many hours were you working a week in the studio, would you say, on average?
You know, I've never worked an hour in my life. I know it's an old cliche, but my life revolves around this. I mean, you know, I even dated artists and songwriters, you know. I mean, we would write songs and sit around a campfire in the evening and do work tapes even, you know. And, you know, when I first set up shop in Nashville and set up an overdub mix room, it was my routine. My home, I have a table and a lamp and a bottle of Perrier in the fridge, and I sleep there and I shower there. I actually have a shower at the studio too, so I can even, you know, bypass some of that, go for a run at the studio and then have a shower here afterwards. But I am in the studio, you know, 15 hours a day. I mean, most of my waking time. It's not workaholic. There's no urgency to any of it. In fact, artists drop by all the time. 10 minutes before you and I jumped on, I had John Oates drop by and just hang out in the parking lot and talk about life. It's the studio here isn't run like a commercial facility or space. This is definitely our culture, and we have we celebrate our friends' successes and birthdays and #1 parties and Grammy awards, and I'm looking forward post-COVID to getting back to hosting NAMM events for the community and open house parties, and this really has become a home base for the songwriters I work with, the collaborators, the engineering community. We have an amazing tech shop with one of Nashville's renowned techs on site. My engineer and studio manager, Ethan, is an amazing tech as well as an engineer. Yeah. Alberto, my mix assistant, is, producing bands, and Amy Peters, who is producing tracks and working on site, has her own culture of people, and just even in this building, it's a social circle. It's a portal to the Nashville community, and a lot of my friends and colleagues and engineers like Reed Shippen and Glenn Rosenstein come over here and actually track and record and drink bourbon and shoot out gear and invite manufacturers to bring new equipment over, and we critique it for them. It's so, there's so much more than, people think, oh my gosh, you're just at the studio 15 hours a day. Yeah, man, that's also living life in this culture. It's not all work.
That's so cool. It's like, yeah, to me, it's like to a lot of us, it's like you're living the dream. You live in the dream. You've been in the studio and you're, eating, sleeping, breathing, bleeding music. It sounds like it's in your blood as well, from what you said as well. Since you were a kid, your dad's been in studios as well. So it's the fact that you're part of this amazing community as well is incredible, man. And I know that you said you're going to show us around the studio pretty soon as well, to have a look around at some of your incredible gear. Before we do that, tell us about some of the producers you've worked with. So I know that you've worked with Kevin Shirley and Bob Rock and Greg Wells. Tell us about some of the experiences that you've had with some of these incredible producers.
Some of that's a Canadian connection. I know that Bob Rock and that Greg Wells. I have you're about to see the studio, and it's a pretty cool destination, and I have a decent enough reputation to be responsible to be referred. I think that, the Bob Rock referral came through just sort of word of mouth through a few people. And, he needed to roll in and just have somebody that he trusted kind of already set up. One of the sessions was over Zoom where he was, he couldn't attend. The other one, he came here and we recorded some vocals for the Motley Crue record. And did some mixing in this room in B, and it's I feel like I'm lucky to have gotten on the radar with a lot of these people and then become their friends. With Kevin Shirley, my connection to Kevin was through the band Journey, and over a decade ago, I got intertwined with those guys by working with Jonathan Cain's daughter, Madison, and I was producing some stuff for her, and I didn't necessarily know who her father was, but he came to the studio one day and he was just, full of praise, saying he loved all of the stuff I was doing and mixing, and was wondering if he could hire me to go out to San Francisco to cut vocals for his band. And I, like a fool, asked what his band's name was, and his Journey. And that's the kind of the beginning of all of that. And I just entered at a magical time where Kevin had like 9 records on the go and deadlines were being crunched, and he was working on a pile of stuff, and he needed the relief, and I was doing good work, and it sort of, the conversation came about me taking over some more of the tracking and overdubs, and then eventually mixing. And I kind of did a test mix for the band and for Kevin, And with Kevin's blessing, I got hired to mix and master that Journey record, which was Eclipse in 2009 or 10. And then that started a whole San Francisco connection. I'd go out there and work with Neil, the guitar player, on a bunch of solo records and stuff he was doing. I was working with Jonathan on some bands he was producing in solo records. I continued producing John's Daughter. And then the end of that, the middle of that story where we sit now is John and I built this studio together 10 years ago in 2011, 11 years ago. Well, 10 years ago. And here we are, you know. And so through all of that, you know, Kevin has brought Jimmy Barnes record over here. He's brought Joe Bonamassa over here. Again, when I mention that community and that collective, it's like, I feel like we're all part more of a community and a kinship, and we're more so than, you know, an available commercial studio slot. You know, it's like when our friends come here to collaborate, you know, they just, they know that they're at home, you know, they know there's no guessing if the facility's a rat's nest, or if the house engineers suck, or if, you know, all of the guessing goes away.
Yeah.
Because it's us, you know, and we all work at a certain level and we all know each other. And so that, you know, a relationship with Kevin has been solid, you know, for the whole time. So when Kevin's in Nashville, you know, we just tend to, you know, get to do some work together on a few different things. The Greg Wells thing, similarly, again, you know, Greg and I had kind of been, we're both from the same area of Ontario, Canada. We have 1 degree of separation, and we've heard each other's names in conversation from sort of 1 degree of separation, mutual, extremely close friends. So the radar has always been there. And, you know, probably about, it's been, you know, I don't know when, maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, I couldn't even guess. I don't know. Like 2020 was a write-off, so I always try to add a year. You know, Greg was in town. We've been trying to connect. I invited him over here a few times, and he's just been too busy. And he needed to borrow a Stratocaster one day, and just happened to text me, and I just happened to be leaving a session, and I grabbed a Strat and I drove it over, and we just hit it off as friends at first, you know. And then he called me the next day and basically said, "Hey man, can I come over?" And he came over here. And he knew I was a guitar player first and foremost, primarily from my reputation in Canada from our mutual friends. So he asked if I'd play guitar on some stuff, and I played on Allison Porter recording, and he was working on a Kiela Settle record, and we just hit it off on a lot of different levels. Greg is such a prolific producer, engineer, musician, multi-instrumentalist that he loved the idea. You know, he's usually just self-contained, and he loved the idea that he could just run over to the piano and I could engineer for him, or he could lay some drums down. And so we have a really cool working thing over here. When Greg comes to Nashville, this is his home base, and sometimes I'll lay some guitar down for him. Sometimes I'll leave him and the artist alone in the room if it's a writing situation. And then, you know, we'll all come in at 5 o'clock and record the track, you know, and Greg will lay some stuff down, and I can, you know, as you're about to see, this studio is set up like it's pre-curated with a couple of drum kits and a piano and 7 synthesizers, guitar amps and cabinets in every room, microphones up in every room. It's
Nice.
not like an empty commercial studio that you rent and it's like a blank canvas. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
So that fits. It's basically a mirror copy of Greg's workflow in LA. You know, Greg kind of has all of that. He's currently building a studio now, which, you know, it's not funny, but he's just, man, it's been an endeavor for a couple of years now, and he's close to completion and hit a few obstacles and hurdles. But so yeah, with Greg, you know, I think every person is a little bit different, but I get a lot of questions about that. People are like, you kind of engineer for famous engineers, and it's like, well, yeah, it's more like I collaborate and workflow where needed. And because I wear a lot of hats, I can play guitar on a track, or I can actually just Pro Tools up on a track, or I can do a full tracking session as an engineer, or I can, you know, there's lots I can do. And when you come to my space, I tend to fit in and be able to switch hats. And that serves a lot of producer engineers well.
That's amazing. And the fact that you can put on so many different hats as well, like you said, the fact that you can play guitar one day or produce or mix or master, you know, another day is amazing. Tell us about Keith Urban as well. The project, was it My Wave that you worked on? Is that right?
Yeah, and that was a Greg Wells session. So there's like a typical day of Greg Wells. You know, they got together in the morning, and you know, we're all set up. There's guitars on the wall. There's and over in Studio A as well. It's funny, the sound of My Wave is the steel resonator guitar that was hanging on the wall in Studio A. You know, Greg had Keith pick that up and start playing it while they were writing. And then Keith played my Telecaster on that track, and Greg played my bass on that track. It's all the instruments that are hanging around, and Greg programmed and played drums and piano and everything. And they were writing with Shy Carter. So when they're writing and I'm not on the right, or that was a track that I didn't co-write on. That was a Greg session. And you know, when they start feeling the track and it starts going well, then I just sneak in. I sneak into the room when I'm needed and start lighting stuff up and loop record Keith on parts, Greg on bass, Greg on piano, Greg on drums. And it happens fast. You know, they were here for a couple of days, and we did a few tracks and weren't really sure right into the last minute if it was necessarily going to be on the record. And then, you know, it made it. So it's, you know, it's on the record. It's just kind of the nature of it. Some artists do sort of writing camp mentality stuff like that, where they're just writing every day and they're working with a bunch of different producers, and everybody's handing tracks in and hoping for the best. And some artists will, you know, cut 25, 30, 40 songs even sometimes by the time it comes to pick the tracks for the record. And so the song is killer. I mean, it's great. It's such a fun, great. Shy Carter's take was pretty much one full pass of him improvising, and just a really interesting, cool, very, very cool track, and fun to just be a part of and witness, and again, part of the community. It's it was just something that came our way on one of Greg's massive camps. That's the same week Greg, you know, was working with 7 or 8 other really reputable name acts as well too, you know, and some of that stuff landed on records, some of it didn't, some of it may still very well, you know. It's all in the creative process, and it's really what this place is set up for. And how my workflow is when I'm working with an artist, if we're writing and we don't love the song, or it just doesn't turn into something sort of exciting, or we're beating our head against the wall, everybody leaves with an iPhone work tape, and it's fine. But if it just comes to life in the room, we can start texting musicians and friends and order some Thai food and bring some red wine in and dim the lights. And by 5 o'clock, we're cutting the track that night. You know, we're catching the momentum. That's sort of the magic workflow of having a production studio. And it's the same essence where people who are building pop tracks in Ableton have that advantage, where their work is pretty much finished and built when they hand it in, and those are masters going out. If we're making music that needs real drum kits and real guitars and musicians, sometimes that's hard to book a studio, you know, book the musicians, get cartage delivered, you know, it just happens later, and the track might lose momentum. Whereas here, we just kind of hand it in every day, and we're handing in masters every day. And some of those masters I'm lucky to have on records as a writer, producer, engineer, guitarist, all the hats I wear, because I can run around and sort of do all that stuff. And it sounds like I'm working really hard, but I'm just here. You know, we can do a lot of damage in this building in a day, you know, and we're passing instruments around, and we're calling the right musicians for the right thing. And then guest musicians, because I have drums and basses and amps and guitars set up. John Mayer had a day off in town, in I think 2019, not 2020. And we were working with a band called the Sisterhood and dreaming and scheming about getting Pino Palladino and Steve Jordan on a track. So we called over to the hotel and they were like, we'd love to play on it, but all our gear's at the arena. And it's like, just get in an Uber. And, they showed up, we handed them some food, some charts, some booze, and cut a track with Pino and Steve, just without scheming or planning. It kind of happened overnight. And that's kind of a daily occurrence over here. And when you look back at it, you go, wow, that was something cool. You almost don't know that it's mounting, or it's not all the stuff that's on your calendar in weeks in advance. Sometimes it's all that spur of the moment stuff that can happen. And I learned that early in my career. And that's why I always set up a production space to be able to accommodate that kind of thing. Because honestly, those are the biggest moments of my career to date, are more spur of the moment, or, hey, we created this one day. And that's a single for an artist, or that's going on the record.
I love that, man. It's like I've for fun, I've been a songwriter for 20 years or so, and taught a couple of other engineers this. And the way that I learned to play guitar was my parents were super strong Christians, and they basically said to me, "Oh, you can't listen to Pearl Jam, you can't listen to Green Day," and all that sort of stuff. So I actually went to my guitar teacher, all rebellious at age 12, 13, and he had this tablature book with all these different bands in there. And I was just like, right, I'm going to learn that Green Day song. I'm going to learn that Pearl Jam song. And that basically, I learned these songs before I heard them. And so, which is a bit bonkers. I know that nobody does that these days, but I know that back then there wasn't really the internet, so you couldn't really listen to that side of things. But what I'd love to hear about, man, is about your songwriting as well, and the guitars that inspire you as well. So what guitars have you got at the moment that you love playing? What guitars did you start off on in the past as well?
So as I talked about my early life, I was always spinning my wheels trying to reinvent. I was playing in dusty old clubs, trying to figure out how to get myself on television and radio. Yeah. And then I was working on television and radio with Canadian touring acts, realizing that we weren't breaking the international market. And I'd see American US acts plow through with their tour buses and their crew, and always getting to headline, and us always being earlier on the bill. And so I started dipping my toes into New York, LA, Nashville, and sort of discovering this thing. 10 years of producing in Nashville, creating, starting out on indie budgets and creating the best recordings I could with the smallest amount of budget. Therefore, doing as much as I could on some of the early records I did here. In other words, playing multiple instruments, engineering, editing, doing all the vocal editing, doing every bit of tracking, doing my own mix prep, mixing the record, doing my own mastering, or at least attended mastering, and sort of building those wider skill sets all the way through to a point where I was getting a reputation as a record maker on a lot of different levels, and started to recruit some help. Finally, after 5 years, had my first assistant, that I could delegate some things off to. Setting up this studio and working in this environment, honestly, I wasn't necessarily writing when we built this space. I was a busy record producer. I had like 8 or 9 records a year, and I was a busy session guitar player. I had advanced to actually playing on other people's records, not just demos. Yeah. And I was a busy mix engineer. So between those 3 jobs, I was always at it. And the thing that I wasn't participating in was songwriting. Literally up until about 2017 or 2016 or 2017. And then working with a lot of collaborators, even Greg Wells and people kind of giving me shit for saying, dude, you played 9 instruments on that track. You built the whole track. You're a track guy, like in the very least, you should just get in the room early with these artists and start to contribute to the creation of this music, because you're already building the entire track, and there's no such thing as a track guy. And Nashville's such a world of prolific lyricists and storytellers and songwriters that I didn't It's not that I didn't want to embarrass myself. It's just that I respect the craft so much that I didn't want to be the guy of like, I'm producing your record, I have to write with you. I always felt a bit of a conflict of interest. But the industry's changed so much that honestly, I switched gears and I started writing. You know, this has been the newest reinvention. You know, like I said, I reinvent my entire career, I think at least every 4 or 5 years. And so the newest one for me is I'm going to keep my head down. I'm not going to approach publishers. I'm just going to write as much as I can. And so in 2018, 2019, 2020, I had this kind of stall because of COVID and switch gears and things got really busy here doing a lot of different kinds of sessions. But I've written 70 or 80 songs in the last year and a half worth of writing, or 2 years. And out of 80, 75 are horrible. But 5 of them are great. And 3 of them are released by artists. And 1 is, knock on wood, hold with a major artist. Yeah. And that's the very beginnings of my writing career. I've just started, I'm a newbie. But I've been surrounded by it for so long, and I've been surrounded by geniuses, and really amazingly prolific writers. And so I'm a fairly articulate guy. I'm a dreamer. I could write a book or a screenplay, and I choose not to. But also I'm a champion of artists and their uniqueness in their stories. So I think as somebody that psychologically have navigated myself as a record producer, really catering to the artists and the people in the room. As a songwriter, I cannot step on their idea or vision, and I can throw out ideas. And once the ideas started, as a lyricist, hey man, I've gotten a few hooks, I've gotten a few high fives in the room, but I've gotten a lot of, oh, did I just say that out loud? Like opening myself to the vulnerability of something is really interesting to me, because I'm not saying that I've gotten an arrogance or an ego, but I've gotten a confidence about being a record maker around all of these really high level functioning people, and never really done anything stupid. Well, I have, but nobody knows. I do stupid stuff on my own, I'm sure. As a general rule, I'm usually the champion in the room of like, great mix, or wow, this tracking data is amazing, or we had a great day today. Now I'm walking into a room and saying really stupid things that don't fit the vision of the song. And it's interesting to have to conjure the confidence to be able to sort of do that. And just be vulnerable and keep at it, and not get shut down on 7 ideas and not throw out the 8th, because the 8th idea sometimes is something that you'll get the high five on, and maybe it'll make the title of the song, or it'll change the whole thing. That's all new to me, and it's exciting. I actually like being in over my head and a little bit adrenalized and just like nervous. I actually get a little tiny bit nervous. I haven't been nervous in years. And, I played stadiums as a guitar player in front of 40,000 people. And just, I'm thinking about a lunch order when I walk out, and so finding ways to just be a newbie, be the the learning sponge in the room, and be vulnerable and fail. Failure is such an important thing. And if I notice that I'm not consistently, failing at something, I'm not saying I've mastered it, but I'm saying that sometimes confidence can turn into a little bit of laziness. And I've never been that guy, I've been recording since the 70s, and I'm still like evolving my Ableton workflow on a daily basis, and interfacing with technologists on a daily basis, and pushing forward into the frontiers of what's new and happening. And I feel that way about my career as a content creator and just as a creative musician. So songwriting, unfortunately, I don't have any long stories of sort of experience, because it's really new to me.
That's great, man. That's so cool. Oh, just to let everyone know, we've had some comments through. We are live, so if you have got any questions for David, as we go along. Feel free to send some messages through as we're live right now. So I'm in Manchester and David's in Nashville. So David, so when you're writing at the minute, what guitars are you picking up? What are your favorite guitars at the moment?
Well, and I'll give you a tour of the space, but I'm blessed with two generations of guitar collection as well. Like you can see my dad's old bass and his old 59 Telly on the wall, and I've got a 62 Jazz Master and my own 59 Gretsch, and I've got a 1962 ES 345, and I've got some really great guitars that were sort of either acquired from family and or family friends that I didn't necessarily pay what a big time collector would pay. And by the same token, I buy a lot of Frankenstein guitars. I love finding cool old guitars that people have swapped the pickups out in, drilled holes in, done really weird stuff on. Nice. And not like the classics. I like original Gibsons and Fenders and the pickups in those. But you know what I'm obsessed with? Where did they go? My guys stole my stuff. They took my guitar. Maybe we'll find it on a walkthrough. Yeah. I find these like old Silvertone guitars and for a couple of $100 that have weird pickups thrown in them, and sometimes it's hit and miss. Especially blindly buying a guitar over the internet and having it mailed to you. Yeah. Anyway, I have this like 1962 Silvertone guitar that we'll go find in a few minutes.
Nice.
That I got for $160 on eBay, and it showed up in a cardboard box. And I immediately played it on a record that I was working on with the strings that came on it, and it's this magical guitar that I think I've put on every record since. Like it's kind of my go-to sort of favorite starting point as a songwriter or creator. It's light and it just sounds really cool and vibey in the room. I like writing on an electric with a very quiet amplification in the background.
Yeah.
Rather than strumming on an acoustic and coming up with a part that might actually be a part of the song. So that Silvertone has been a really special guitar for me. I also, here's a Frankenstein. This was a 62 also. For whatever reason, 1962 guitars gravitate themselves towards me. So this is a 62 Melody Maker that somebody threw a weird 70s Ibanez pickup into. And then I had my guitar tech put a pull tap on it. Push pull pot. Actually, it's there. And, it's just an old cracked up Melody Maker that I got a gig to go to, play the Today Show in New York City. And I didn't want to put any of these really rare, precious guitars on my back. And I saw this one on Craigslist for like $600. So I was like, man, I'll just buy that. And if the neck breaks in half on it, I don't care. It's a $600 guitar.
Yeah.
And it showed up here, and it's also one of the magic guitars that lives in this room because I reach for it all the time. It's really unique. It plays great. I also have, my studio is about 9 doors down from Joe Glazier, who's one of the greatest guitar techs in the world. And so I've bought these weird old, like Univox guitars and taken, I bought a $200 Univox guitar, took it to Joe and said, what's going to make this thing intonate and play well on sessions? And he's like, well, we got to pull all the frets off. We got to plane the neck down. We got to relocate the fret slot positions. We need to move the bridge. And, it's going to be $800 to fix up a $200 guitar. And so I'm like, go for it, And it turned into something, again, really unique, special that I use all the time. If I were to sell that guitar, it's worth $200. The work didn't improve its value, but it's not about that. I'm not a collector. Honestly, there's about 65 or 70 guitars in this building, and I love and have a relationship with each one of them, and I play them, and nothing's in a glass case. It's all very used and inspires things. I love old basses too. I've got a 62 Jazz, which is my dad's, and I've got a 67 P bass, and you know, I keep just a stock Hofner around, and a couple of other basses as well too.
So cool, man. As I went around, I don't know if you've built a guitar from scratch, but I went around a timber yard with one of my mates, and what we did is like we used it was like a Jazzmaster neck that we got a Fender one, and then we've also used it's like a Firebird style body that you built for me.
Yeah,
and it sounds gorgeous. But then what we decided to do is use just one pickup, so we used a triple shot Seymour Duncan pickup. I don't know if you've got any of this on any of your guitars, but you can switch between a single coil, a P90, and a humbucker.
oh wow, that's
great.
amazing. No, I haven't checked that out yet.
They're amazing, man. It's like, and the tone is fantastic. But one thing I will show you quickly before we carry on, this guitar, so literally brand new out the box. It's just an Epiphone, like a Les Paul custom, and the neck was originally broken on it, so a professional sorted it all out. Guess how much?
Oh, I have no idea.
£60. So I don't know what that is in dollars. But to say it's like a £600 guitar, he's literally just selling it for £60. You know, £600 guitar for £60, which is crazy.
That's the stuff we all look for and hope for. You know, I've back when I used to tour, I would, and before the internet, so old guys, you know, when I was just a touring sort of barroom guitar player playing covers out there, I would hit all the local music stores and pawn shops. There was no internet, there was no eBay. People didn't know what stuff was worth. Yeah. And sometimes there'd be a beat up old Telecaster, you know, that was a 60s or a 70s telly, next to a brand new, you know, a Squire or a Mexican made. And the guy'd say, well, I'll sell you the new shiny one for $400, or the beat up crappy one for $80, you know, or something ridiculous like that. That doesn't seem to happen much anymore. I have one friend in town who is like the Guitar Karma guy. He just keeps trading like Siegel acoustic guitars for 62 Stratocasters. Like, I don't know where he finds these things, but it just seems impossible. But he's my nemesis, and he, you know, he's got my, like, the greatest Stratocaster I've ever played, and I have offered him 10 times its value in stuff. Like, I'm like, I'll give you an Audi, you know, 4 channels of Neve, blah blah blah, and he's like, nope. And you know, it's kind of an ongoing joke. I just put, you know, I'm like, I'll give you that Morton house. I'll give you a house in Nashville. And he just won't do it. But I wouldn't also give him a house for it, because it's not worth that. It's just kind of a joke. But yeah, I love guitars over here. I think each one has a character, and sometimes there are songs in those guitars. You know, I'll be in a music store or a shop, and I'll pick something up, and maybe it's not the greatest session guitar. You know, maybe it doesn't intonate well and it's a little buzzy, but it feels a certain way, and it makes you play very differently. As a guitar player, I'm going to play a Les Paul through a Plexi very differently than I'm going to play a Gretsch through, you know, a matchless amp. You know, I mean, they're just going to be really different approaches. And I feel kind of the same way about songwriting. I have a 100-year-old crappy little baby grand piano at my house that I write the coolest little singer-songwritery campy things on. And when I'm here at the studio, we have a $200,000 Fazioli that I just can't write any of that cool stuff on. It's just too great. It's like the great session piano. But you know, but I can play that on a track, you know, and as a musician, come up with a really refined, amazing, clear sort of track, you know. But if I'm looking for the character for which the song was written, I just record the crappy old piano at my house, you know.
It's almost like the instrument has got a soul, and it's like has to be at the right moment when you pick that instrument up. So I've picked up a friend's £5,000 Les Paul before and gone, oh, that's cool. And he's there going, oh yes, this is the best thing ever. But then I kind of pick up a crappy, I don't know, $100 Squire style Fender guitar and literally start playing it and writing a song on it. And it's however you feel, I suppose, in that moment.
Well, and there's something about these old guitars too, and we don't need to get into super guitar nerdery, but it's the grain of the wood. So you can go in, never mind the vintage thing, because people are like vintage, this or that. Yes, all my guitars, I don't think I have any new guitars. They're all from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, maybe the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Sure. Because something happens to some of them. I have a few newer guitars. And you can go into like a Guitar Center and pick up two that are off the same assembly line, same finish, same everything. One rings out and vibrates on your body and the other one doesn't. And there's just no rhyme or reason for it. There are just some guitars speak out. And so like this old Gretsch on the wall. Yeah. Like I don't have 5 of those. I have one. And that is the 9th Gretsch I've had, and when I encounter one that's better than the one I have, I sell the one I have. And because I have the great Gretsch, that's been curated. And then, if I have a really good one, like by the time I got to the 8th Gretsch, the one that preceded that was actually a pretty great guitar. I sold it to Pat Buchanan. And so Pat's got that guitar and I've got this one. And, we've got a lot of great guitar players and sort of guitar whisperers like Tom Bukovac. Tom had a store 3 doors down from here. And I said, man, I need a Jazzmaster. I don't have a Jazzmaster in my collection. I want a really cool one. And he said, I'll call you, man. I'll call you when I have a Jazzmaster for you. And I'd walk in there once in a while and there'd be a Jazzmaster hanging there. And I go, you were going to call me. And he'd go, you don't want that one. And I go, what do you mean? And I'd pick it up and I'd play it and I'd kind of go, oh yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a 62. It's amazing cosmetically, but I don't know, and it happened twice. I went in and again, and there's like a 64 Jazzmaster. And I was like, I thought you were I don't want that one. Right. He's like, no, you don't want that one. And then one day he just called out of the blue and said, Dave, I got your Jazzmaster. You should get down here. And it was that one on the wall. And I picked it up and it rang and it was, it just felt like it's just so much better than the other guitars. It's the same thing, but it just played and felt and articulated so much better than the other 2 guitars. And so I don't have the biggest guitar collection, but I have a highly curated guitar collection. Like I have a lot of guitar players that come in here and they pick one up and go, wow, this one's pretty magical, isn't it? Like they can feel it. And I go, yeah, they all are. Not to be arrogant or weird, but no, sure. I've been collecting and getting rid of guitars, like, passing off the ones that aren't great for the better ones for a good 30 years plus. So they're all good. I have some functional guitars like, a cheap SE Paul Reed Smith that I just use as a high strung, but I like the sound of the P90 on it. And it's got like a Nashville high strung tuning set on it. I have a few middle of the road baritone guitars, like in Eastwood and it's funny. I have a Squire Antiqua green baritone guitar that I got at a scratch and dent sale at Guitar Center for $149.
Nice.
And I thought, man, I'll put pickups on this thing. I'll refinish it. I'll blah, blah, blah. I brought it back to the studio, played it on a session that day, and I haven't touched it. I haven't changed it. I've played it on the Grand Ole Opry. I actually played it on the John Legend Carrie Underwood duet. It is one of my great studio guitars. And so I've had other people say, hey, can I borrow that? I'm like, do yourself a favor and buy one. These are great. They're all $1,000. People like have gone nuts on reverb. Fender's not making them anymore. They're just cheap Squires, but they're so good that, Chris Stapleton actually bought a bunch when they were about $600 on the used market. His guitar tech works out of here as well too. Yeah. And so I don't adhere to the snobbery or the ego of it's got to be a 60 blah, 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 or from the 50s. I happen to have a lot of those guitars because I grew up with them and I've come across them. But I also play just a lot of really random oddball guitars like Silvertones and like $149 Squire baritones.
Nice. Tell us, as you mentioned, so maybe a couple of artists we can have a chat about before we do the studio tour, if that's cool with you, man. Tell us about working with John Legend and that guitar work you did for him as well. How did that session
Well, that
go?
was with the Carrie Underwood record we were doing, and so I think it was in February. I don't even remember when it was. Unfortunately, this whole pandemic has just erased my memory of timing. But Carrie and Greg were here writing, and the idea was, Greg had called me and said, March, April, maybe May, we're going to book off like a whole couple of weeks at the studio. We're going to do this Carrie Christmas record. And the whole treatment, man, we're going to bring him in and the band players, musicians. We're going to track everything here. Carrie will come and we'll kind of do this whole thing. And then we kind of just penciled in the notion of it, and then the pandemic hit. And it was like, well, looks like that's not going to happen. And basically I lost every booking I had for the studio. And for myself, I was supposed to be working in New York. I had a couple of things in LA. Everything was completely canceled. All my friends' tour dates were canceled. Every act I was working with basically on hold. And Greg, basically, because he's the only guy on the planet that could have pulled that record off, he played everything on it. He basically built those tracks and then implemented some musicians. And, Greg's used me on guitar before. So the Hallelujah duet with John Legend and Carrie was sort of the last addition to the record. And at the 11th hour, he was building the track, and I grabbed that $149 baritone and just threw some guitar tracks down over Zoom. It's interesting that duet happened over Zoom. Carrie and I were kind of bubbled, quarantined here for about a month, singing all that record and doing background vocal sessions with local background singers and some overdubs. And I played, the guitar on the Hallelujah track here. And Greg played most everything else over there, but, had a couple of mail-in tracks and a few guest performances on that. But that whole record was done early in quarantine as sort of one of the first new realizations of how we need to work. The strings and the orchestra were done at East West, with some of the LA Symphony, socially distanced out, all over Zoom, unattended. And that whole record was kind of done like this. Every day we had, just like you, up on the screen, and, we have an iPad up the vocal booth behind me. So Carrie had Greg basically on the music stand, and we'd work hard, and produce these. Greg produced these sessions all over Zoom and from his, temporary studio, because he was also in the middle of, leaving his studio and building a studio and in a transitional space. So, and working on soundtracks for, massive movies and things too. So, I think that it was a little bit of peace of mind that we had a secure technical process to be able to pull this off. And I really tested the internet and sort of the Zoom and Audio Movers protocol and getting a really good analog feed for Greg up on the console so that he could hear in studio quality what was happening. And we'd shoot out mics, honestly, over the internet. We'd put up a ribbon, a PB90 for her. And then, she has her favorite ELA 251 and tracking her through a Fairchild and an 1176 and being, at times Greg wanting to be aggressive with that. You wouldn't be able to make those decisions, I think, in sort of some previous technologies. So lucky the pandemic ended in a technological state where the bandwidth and internet and some of the tools that we have access to allowed us to make a record as meticulous and still, still focus on the details of that. And so that kind of set precedence for the work for the rest of the year here. And I did a lot of remote sessions. The first thing I did was actually a remote individual quarantined recording of the band Journey playing Don't Stop Believin' for a UNICEF special with the Eurythmics and Sheryl Crow and Sting. Wow. And, you know, basically fresh, like 2 weeks into the pandemic, I had the Journey guys just emailing me their audio tracks and their video thing. And I put it together and mixed it here for the show. And had started testing that technology. And I was logging in to Manila, you know, where Arnell, the singer, is over in Manila, 14 hours difference, tracking vocals over Zoom. That was kind of my test preliminary workflow for the whole Carrie Underwood record.
That's incredible, man. That's so cool. Tell us about Justin Bieber as well. So how did the Justin Bieber project come around?
Well, the Justin Bieber thing was hometown. We're from the same hometown.
Okay.
So Stratford, Ontario, Canada, is famous for newscasters and hockey players, and then a real early musical contingency of my father, and who I mentioned played for the Hawks with Levon Helm. Richard Manuel from the band was their piano player in their high school band, a band called the Revels, and John Till was their guitar player. And so if you fast forward through the history of rock and roll, my dad ended up doing records and touring and working with Jerry Reed and Todd Rundgren, and coming to Nashville and work with Cowboy Jack and a Canadian duo named Ian and Sylvia, and put a folk rock band together called the Great Speckled Bird. And everybody from Bob Dylan and Neil Young cut songs that band had, you know, penned and written. And so I kind of lost track when I went back that far. Where were we talking about?
About Bieber?
Bieber. Yeah. This was my hometown. And so, so I grew up in that generation. Dad had a studio. Then I kind of set up a shop, even though I left home when I was 16 for the road. I partnered up with a local drummer friend of mine who was in all my grade school bands and high school bands. We made music together for a couple of decades in our hometown. Yeah. His name was Jay Reel, and he had a massive shed on his home property, and we converted it to a real recording studio. Like we bartered and traded for real wood treatment and things like that. But we had a Steinway piano in there and a drum kit and an official control room, and we really had that set up for about a decade in our hometown. And Jay was a traveler too, and we had a third partner, Ryan. And so between the three of us, one of us was always in town, and we were always kind of working in and out of there. I left all my guitar gear there, and you know, the computer in the control room was mine, and the control surface was Jay's, and it was kind of a collective studio. And so we were the only, you know, recording studio in probably, you know, within 100 miles, maybe, or maybe not 100, maybe 50 miles. And so it was the natural choice for any young artists to like want to come record. We had a reputation in Canada for being record makers. And I went to school with, you know, Justin's mom. We were, you know, classmates. Justin's, you know, mom's brother, you know, his uncle is a close friend of mine. His other uncle was the singer in my high school band, Chris Dale. So we were all, you know, family connected, and I was a natural place as well. Our little studio had Jay and his wife, Jacqueline, was invested in the community, in all the music festivals and all the talent shows. She taught vocals, and she actually taught Justin. He was a part of her class and her collective. So that's kind of how I knew Justin, is, you know, before the big break, when he was making videos busking outside of the theater in our hometown, he was also coming out to the studio and singing on all the community projects and things like that. You know, I certainly didn't, you know, break Justin's debut record or his career. That was all, you know, stuff that happened as a result of the stuff that he was doing around our hometown and getting on the radar. But he got involved with Jake and then you know, he and his mom was Patty was a great business person, and just got all of Justin's videos and stuff to Usher and a bunch of people in Atlanta, and the rest is history. I mean, they basically just swooped him up and took him out of Stratford and brought him down to Atlanta and made a massive world-renowned star out of him. So that's just kind of like the hometown story.
Incredible. And Shawn Mendes, the last one for you to ask you about, maybe before we do the studio tour.
Yeah, so when Shawn had such a smash with the handwritten thing, when it came time for him to do more orchestral paired recordings and doing his Memories project, Jakir King was the producer and executive producer on that, and just asked if we could record some of that over here and cut some strings. And that's just a natural part, again, that I mentioned about the Nashville community, is that we're all connected and we have a great working environment. And it's a natural, you'll see the tracking room. Strings sound really amazing out on this floor. Our place here is a great hang. And Jakir and I are just part of the same community. So that was really him bringing that project here. That was, his project and his session, but we got to, work on that record a little bit. That's kind of Nashville. It's like, people just call up out of the blue and anybody can just kind of come walking through the door. And it's usually one of those referrals I talk to. There's like a lot of people that really pay it forward in this town and really try to involve people they like and places they like and expand their network. So
that's amazing. Thanks, David. Thanks for telling us all the insight behind all these incredible artists that you've worked with. So shall we do the studio tour? Can we have a look around?
Let me try and see what happens when I log in on my iPhone. And if we go into a massive amount of feedback, I will get ready.
Let's give it a go. This is live, people. Let's give it a go. Amazing. Just why David's logging onto his phone, I just want to say thank you so much for everyone that's joining so far and have been watching the live stream. We've had an absolute blast having a chat with David so far today. So we're going to be going over to David's phone. So you can probably see all this incredible gear behind him. He's going to show us around some of his gear, show us around some of the studio as well, around Addiction. So let's add David's phone to the live stream. Let's give that one a go. Okay, I'm going to remove your main picture off. Let's have a look. See how we go. So I'm hoping that should work. I think we're good to go, David.
Okay, so can you hear me?
I can indeed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove myself off the screen so you can show everyone around.
Okay. Well, maybe we won't start in the mix room. Maybe we'll kind of just start at the back door where everybody comes in. I'll just take us through the machine room. So this is a little sidecar Chilton console that was made for Tony Banks from the band Genesis for recording Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and Selling England by the Pound. And it was I bought it from Dave LaBruyere, who was the John Mayer bass player on the first couple of records. You let me know if you're still with us, with me, Rich.
Yeah, I am indeed. I'm just removing myself off the screen so everyone can see everything in its glory.
Okay, cool. I don't think I can hear you when you're not on the screen. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I
can stay on there.
So this is sunny Nashville, beautiful outside. And when you come in the back door of the studio, it empties out onto our tracking room, which we keep dialed up. This is a down day. This is actually what happens at the studio when there's not a session booked. A lot of other studios just sweep the floors and wipe the place down and put all the gear away. We're the exact opposite. We set up 3 drum kits. There's 20 or 30 guitars laying around. There are vocal mics set up and dialed. There's acoustic guitars, basses, bass amps, tons of keyboards. There's ISO rooms that are different worlds. Like in this ISO room, we just refer to this as acoustic world. So Um, we have a PB90 and a small diaphragm condenser, a C61. And there's like cabinets that are mic'd up pretty much everywhere in every room of the studio. And there are amps that, are patched through to those cabinets in pretty much every corner, so that when we're writing and creating, we can just kind of plug anything in and go. And, there's a guitar vault out here with just like a lot of different utility guitars, from, baritones and high strungs to strange guitars. There's a main sort of modern typical drum kit set up in the center of the room. I got an A&F kick drum and some Gretsch toms. And then, we've got about 10 or 15 snares as options in the back. The control room has lovely windows so that we can actually see daylight and moonlight and starlight.
That looks incredible, man. That looks insane.
And so, we diffuse the room with Chris Huston as well. So the ceiling's got lots of diffusion. There's the whole back wall is diffused as well. And then I just have instruments laying around that are mic'd up. I've got vibes that are ready to go and a glockenspiel. We've got this crazy, weird, hybrid Ludwig kit that is like 2 kits or 3 kits from the 50s and 60s, which is like an old concert bass drum with a really deep sort of marching snare and a deeper field snare over on the corner, and then a set of 1962 club dates, and then like a little auxiliary kick pedals. So you can do a lot. Hang on a second. Just give me a second.
Yeah, no worries, man.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
And so back here we've got Keyboard World. We keep a lot, that's a weird Crew Mar and just like a Roland synth, but we've got an interface electronics mixer that can send all of these keys through a Trek 2 pedal. And so for example, I can put the Wurlitzer through a Leslie cabinet in isolation, or the little Fatty, a little Moog Fatty. And then we've got a C3 here, which is the same as a B3, except for the cabinet. And this Wurlitzer is the Wurlitzer that Jonathan Cain and Steve Perry wrote Faithfully in Open Arms on. And this is the Jupiter 8 synth that's in the Separate Ways video and was on the original Journey recording. So these are John Cain's classic contributions to the studio floor. And then, I've got a pedal board on the keyboard rig as well, too. So we can throw all kinds of weird Memory Man effects and some distortion and just kind of mosh up Keyboard World. Bass World out here. Couple of Hofner basses, couple of classic Fender basses. And all these little workstations that are set up. The idea here is that the whole studio gets set up as though it's 10 minutes before a master session at all times. So this is 100% a creative space. There's no technical process. When there's an artist on site, we're not hooking up microphones, patching things, testing stuff. We are creating. We're writing a song. This is the Fazioli grand piano. And this was actually on the road with Journey for a couple of years as the road piano, which John retired and has a Roland V piano out with them now. And so that's sort of the main tracking room and piano room. Then just looking in here to Studio A, which is the main tracking environment, we've got another Trident TSM console. This was the console from the record plant in Sausalito, Studio B. So Aretha Franklin, Sly and the Family Stone, Jefferson Airplane, Huey Lewis, Journey. So many people recorded music on this console while it was there. And we have some great techs that keep this thing completely dialed and running. I've got the 24 buses of the console, normaled or bust to tape. And we even pass it through the tape machine on input to the HDIO converters. It's just always in line. I like the sound of the tape machine, even if it's just passing through the transformers and not using tape. But if we need to switch to a tape session, we just literally pop a tape on and hit record. And so this control room looks out into the tracking room that we were just out wandering around in. And in the back of this room, there's the piano room. And in the back of this room is a vocal booth for the artist. Also, we talked about the Keith Urban track. It's like, these are the guitars on that track just because they happen to be hanging in this room. That's sort of like having a creative space that inspires. There's that guitar I was telling you about, by the way. This is that Silvertone guitar that I put on every.
Dude. Yeah, it's cool, man. It's
and
really
so
cool.
That is, that was like $150, I think. And somebody put some weird pickups in it, and it's pretty great. It's a pretty great guitar. Through the outboard here, it's all pretty typical stuff, 1176s, LA2As, CL1B, a few distressors and a Fatso, SSL bus compressor, 33609, some SPL transient designers, a few Pultecs, LA3As, 1073s, then just kind of a random API lunchbox full of stuff, a few API compressors. And then, I have quite a few Universal Audio 175s, 176s, and 177s. I had never seen a 177 before, and they're pretty rare. And that's that bottom one, and the meter panel was added later. There's no meter or input or output attenuators on the original 177. So that panel was made later.
Where did you find the 177? Where was it?
Nashville is this amazing resource of like studios that have been around forever. This came from a studio called House of David, which was David Briggs' studio. He was Elvis Presley's keyboard player. So, Elvis could have recorded on these compressors while they were there. I'm not going to officially say that, but it's, it's part of the history where they came from. So when studios close or liquidate, we all get, the gear brokers are all friends of ours. So we get a heads up. There's some of the stuff that we've done, the Shawn Mendes record and the Carrie Underwood record and Joe Bonamassa and, the Graffiti U, Keith Urban record and some Journey stuff. And as we go into Studio B, which is where we were hanging out, get to see sort of the rest of the room. You see my ring light that I had set up. But, this is the mix console. It's got a mega mix automation system on it from the 90s that's being actually run on a old Mac System 753. But the old Mac has been converted to run off a micro SD card instead of a SCSI drive. So that's super nerdery. And then, I've got an Avid control here, like a Pro Tools dock for in the box fader moves. But I mix on the console and I use the fader automation on this desk, and I love the TSM EQs. And then some of the favorite sort of mixing stuff, from on my mix bus, I've got a retro EQ and a couple of Moog air bands and an SSL compressor and a Trident compressor. And then down at the bottom, I've got a Fairchild 670. But some of this stuff, again, more 175s, 176. I have a record cutter from 1938 on a drawer here as well too. Couple of Yuri 1A compressors that were commissioned by the CIA for the United States Information Agency. They were the only military spec limiter that Yuri ever was commissioned to make to broadcast propaganda speeches during the Cold War. World's greatest parallel vocal compressor. And so that's sort of like the this is the writing creative space. So I'll be in here with an artist, and I've got an Ableton machine cart here and a MIDI cart and some of my sort of more useful favorite guitars around the room. I've got my guitar tracking rig, which is a, sort of, it's hard to get the whole shot in, I guess. It's from floor to ceiling, but this whole rig is terminated to a couple of cabinets that are left mic'd up in this back vocal booth here. And this vocal booth that's part of this little Studio B is where I track a lot of artist vocals, but we keep everything mic'd up here. And I have one of those Dynamount robots, for moving the mics around in the control room. And headphone mixer. And, this looks into Studio B. So that's the view the artist gets. And out here, we're in the lounge. Got a Wurlitzer jukebox from 1947. We've got Tyler, the intern.
Hey.
Say hello to the internet.
How you guys doing?
Hey,
Good.
Tyler.
Hey.
And so, this is the front lobby of the studio. We have a lounge upstairs that kind of feels more like an apartment, for a lot of reasons. And, we've got nice chandeliers through the building. And we've got a writing room, production room. We've got a full walk-in shower here, as well as laundry and a little guest room, massage chair, little bed, hangout.
I'm now
And
starting
this is Amy's room. I don't know if she's here. No, she's gone.
I'm starting to realize, David, why you never go back to your own house.
Yeah. We got everything here. So we got a Pro Tools Carbon rig up here. This is like a little great writing workstation for just, track and scratch vocals and building tracks. And, it's the room's acoustically treated. And it looks out onto a deck outside. The studio lounge is, a nice hang. There's kind of a bigger dinner hang here. And of course, you can't have a studio without a bar. And then we've got, a full chef's kitchen up here and a balcony that takes us out into the open air of Nashville. Can't really see downtown probably during the daytime. But this is that neighborhood. This is the community of Nashville that I was describing. There's we're looking at Universal, which is House of Blues. There's Westlake Pro right across the street. This entire this entire neighborhood is all music. So that's about it. We have an echo chamber under the parking lot that is a replica of Abbey Road Studio 2's echo chamber. I've got a tech shop out there. I've got a plate reverb room out there. But that stuff's all just sort of locked away. But let's go back towards Studio B to finish the conversation.
Absolutely. I think you've just shown a lot of engineers Mecca, to be honest there, David. It's just like there's no surprise that you never leave this place, man. It's great.
Yeah, this is the dream studio. We built a dream studio. I mean, it's and as I described, it becomes a home base for people because it feels kind of like a really elaborate home. It just happens to have corners of really cool things. There's a 1955 Bassman, the first year of the Bassmans.
Beautiful.
My grandfather's old clarinet from 1930.
Wow.
And so let me get back into B here. and see if can you add my computer back?
I can. One moment. I think we're good to go.
You should be able to hear me.
I can. Fantastic. Thank you
All right,
so
well, that's the little studio tour of like kind of all the setups. And as I described before, it's a production room. So everything's mic'd up. When we leave at night, when we're locking up, rather than sweeping up, we sweep up every morning, but we actually get sounds. So we just dial the drum kit up. The engineers here are all musicians as well. We all play a little bit. I play all the instruments on a regular basis here. So we actually, when there's nothing happening at the studio and there's no bookings, we dial everything. We get bass sounds, drum sounds, guitar sounds, set the whole console up with cue mixes. Everything is always ready to go. And more often than not, our workflow is for sessions to just manifest out of thin air with a moment's notice. And we're able to accommodate, some of the largest sessions in the industry that way.
That's amazing. It's just stunning space. And, it's no wonder that you get so inspired where you are. My question for you is as well, though, with all the outboard gear that you've got in these amazing rooms as well. I've seen that you work with some plugin companies or use some plugin companies in the studio, such as FabFilter. So tell us about some of the plugins that you use when you're in your DAW as well.
My work is sort of truly hybrid. In fact, I believe it or not, looking behind me, I'd still consider my workflow to be in the box.
Wow.
Every channel of my console is just a hardware insert in Pro Tools. So it might as well be a plugin, but it's not. It's a path of hardware. And I consistently have that, plugins added before or after the send and return from the console channel. And I have inserts on the channel, the console itself. So a lot of this outboard gear, if I send anything out channel 21, for example, in Pro Tools, it automatically goes to this fader. It goes through this insert path. It's got a quad 80 EQ. It's got a 1176 that feeds a 175 with an Orban de-esser, back in, parallel compressed out to a Uri 1A, parallel compressed to a standard audio leveler, parallel compressed to a Devil Lock plugin, but it's also got Soothe on it in the box. It's also got all of my favorite, in the box chains. And that's the vocal. Same thing for bass. The bass in the analog world always comes up channel 18 of my desk, and there's a gate stay level strapped across channel 18 of my desk. But I like R bass, like Waves R bass. I like Stephen Massey's tape plugin on bass, with the bright switch over a little bit and just a little bit of drive on it.
Yeah.
And so if you look through my template, it's pretty elaborately full of plugins. And I love Gulfos and Soothe and lots of Waves stuff and all the FabFilter stuff and all the Plugin Alliance stuff, all the UA stuff. I just basically, I think I have, 12 or 1300 plugins on this system. And it's all amazing. What a great time to be making music. I'm in love with all of it. I'm not an analog snob. People go, oh, the plugin's better than that. No, everything's good. Everything's good, and it's all different. Like there's only one sound I can get by putting a vocal down on a record cutter and cutting it to a lacquer and then recording it back into my Ableton Push through the speaker on the lid. Like I use technology and ribbon mics from the 1930s. I use alpha software that won't be released until 2023 on a daily basis. I love it all. I use so many different eras of technology at every moment sitting in this chair. My console automation's from the 80s, but I have a Pro Tools dock for the in-the-box automation. I feel the same way about you know, there are some things I just cannot get in the box that are specific pieces of gear that might not even sound like anything else on the planet. Like my 175s are all a little bit unique sounding,
Yeah,
you know? And so, but I feel the same way about plugins, you know, and
yeah.
I tend to gravitate towards plugins that don't exist in the analog realm. Like
Yeah.
you can't do this in the analog realm. And there's so much elaborate side chaining that can happen with plugins in Pro Tools that can't happen in the analog realm. There are plugins, like I mentioned, Golfos before, that are just amazing, incredible technology creations that never had an analog counterpart. They're not emulating anything. It's the way of the future. It's just moving forward. So, so I love it all. And anytime a new company comes out, or a plugin company comes out, or a new technology from one of the companies I interact with, man, I'm alpha testing or beta testing, or at least doing the 14-day free trial when it hits public. Like I'm auditioning literally everything that's ever released to the market.
Yeah.
And then I pick my favorites. It's funny, I'll have some analog gear that's laid around that I haven't patched in 4 or 5 years. I sell it. This isn't a museum. It's gone. I'll find something that I want to use, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Believe it or not, every single piece of this gear in this studio, in studio A and B, it's got, you can see the label on it. You can see where it's designated, you know? It's like, there's my vocal, there's my bass, there's my background vocals, there's my, you know, all the way through everything and what I like to use it for. If I ever meet a piece of gear that is superior to what I'm currently using, I'll audition it, and then I'll sell the old gear and put it in. When I meet a plugin that kills its analog counterpart, like the SPL transient designers, why do I want analog SPL transient designers in my mix room that I have to manually recall when the plugin is identical? Like I could, you know, what's funny about the SPL transient designers versus the SPL, the Brainworks, the Plugin Alliance plugin, is that I could dime it out in analog and duplicate the track and dime it out in plugin world. And when I phase inverted it, it almost nulled. Like,
that's crazy.
It almost nulled, you know? And so I'm like, hey man, I've got a 4-banger transient designer. I'm going to move that into the tracking room because that's a tracking tool.
Yeah. It
used to be a mixing tool, but now there's a plugin for the mixing tool. And so I feel like this world is like mix world. Like that stuff behind me sounds a certain way. I don't feel like I've met a plugin counterpart or a hardware counterpart that I like better. So it remains. Sure. Anything that leaves this room, I decide, do I want that in the tracking room environment? Because I'm still 100% analog on the way in. You know, I'm not necessarily tracking through plugins in Studio A, but I have an Apollo. I track through plugins. I have a Carbon. I track through plugins at home, upstairs in the production room. I'm not shy, and I'm not, you know, I'm not negative about it either. I get great tracks that become master vocals. If it happened in a writing room and the performance was inspired, it stays. I'm not like, you got to come downstairs and cut this on a real compressor and a $40,000, signal path and a $20,000 microphone.
Yeah.
Hey man, if the SM7 into the Carbon sounds amazing, that's what's on the record.
Absolutely, man. So true. It's like my main gig is I'm a mastering engineer, and I had some really good advice. And someone said to me, I was thinking about buying shitloads of outboard gear, and they basically just said to me, "Look, get a really, really good A to D D2A converter." So I went with what have I got? An RME ADI2 Pro FS, and the conversion on that is amazing. And literally, I spent the rest of my money all in the box. And that's what I did, man. And it's like you said, like,
absolutely. So and and I did the same thing in both worlds.
Yeah.
So my plugin collection gets curated on a regular basis and thinned out. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but there are plugin companies that I subscribe to. Their whole package just decided that I didn't love the sound or the ergonomics or the workflow or something about it. And so I just clean it out. I take it off the iLock. I don't renew the subscription. And then, like I said, sometimes a hardware piece will come in and I won't quite know what to do with it. And we'll just set it on a table and put some tie lines into it. And while I'm mixing, I'll just start firing stuff through it. And if I don't like fall on the floor in love with it, it goes away. I don't buy it. You know, I mean, it's not like even it's rare or precious. It's not why it's here. If something's here, it won my heart, whether it's a guitar or a plugin or a piece of hardware.
Yeah.
And so you do this long enough. I've done the same thing in hardware world. And honestly, the curation of a big hardware collection is almost more about like instant results. You know, my vocal chain is really elaborate and it really works in a lot of instances. And I have so many parallel buses that I can slam it one way or another or back it off, like without setting up any sort of elaborate configurations. It always gives me results. You know, this workflow is very fast. I can just fan stuff out the desk, and I've got between my plugins in my mix template and the hardware in the hardware template, I'm pretty much ready to go. I can do a lot of damage to shaping in a mix in about the first 30 minutes, you know? And as things become better and easier, clearly that's easier is going to happen in the box. It's not going to happen out here. No. This workflow is this workflow. And it's cool. I can commit tracks on a nightly basis. So I've got, you know, printed analog hardware copy backups of everything from the night before. You know, I have a great workflow. We've got great recall workflow here. I can null a mix from 6 months ago that's 100% fanned out in the analog realm. And my guys are really hip to that and really fast at bringing back something that was up on the desk or in this room earlier. Yeah. But, you know, the thing is that you've got to get excited about the sound of this stuff. You can't just like buy a plugin because it's the cool thing. Yeah. You know, I mean, I still use stock plugins in Logic and in Ableton and in Pro Tools because I really like what it does instantly and I know it well. And there are some, there's such an evolution in plugins. I think Acoustica Audio is making some of the best sounding stuff. It's really CPU intensive and it's sometimes hard to work with in multiples. But the one thing I will say is I can identify some of my hardware when it's not doing anything. Like if I put my 175 across a vocal with no gain reduction and the needle's not even moving at all, and it's gain matched for, you know, send and return, I can just pop the insert in and out and I can blindly name it. I go, man, I can hear my piece of gear in there. There's a harmonic response that happens with the 175 that isn't happening. Yeah. And up until fairly recently, I never really felt that way about a plugin until this Acoustica stuff. And Greg, not to, you know, pitch my friend Greg Wells' contributions to that, but Greg very graciously brought me in to do some presets for the El-Ray plugin. And the first thing I noticed on that is that the second I inserted it, before I even dialed up any gain reduction, I heard a harmonic response and was sort of like, oh, this is doing something right away. And some people might go, that's bad. We want it. Bypass should be, or like not doing anything should be not doing anything. But that's not what analog gear actually does. Yeah. And as we get more and more into that world, mind you, it drives me nuts that some plugin companies have created the noise emulation. So if you have an H delay in your session, I have spent 3 hours like pulling channels from my console, just assuming that it's in the analog realm because of course it has to be. And then it's like, oh no, you've got an H delay with the noise on it on an aux return. And it's like, oh, who would do that by default, especially? Nevertheless, that's just a rant. Plugins are really coming along, man. Like, honestly, completely agree. I'm not going to say which ones, but I've done a few projects that were really high profile mainstream projects that I decided to do in the box because I was traveling and I had a laptop with me and I could interface and I had a traveling pair of Genelecs and good listening environments. And I was coming back and mixing it here anyway, but I got the bulk, most of the work done in the box. For me, it takes longer to physically navigate that work. And maybe it might take a little longer to dial in the tones where it's instantly already kind of here on some gear. Like, you know, I have a Compex parallel drum compressor that's just smashed, you know, to oblivion on the limiter. And I mean, you might as well glue the knob shut. It's the only thing I use it for. It never changes. It's been there for a decade.
Yeah.
And the second that I just push my drum bus up, it just does this thing that I know really well. I could probably find, and I found similar things actually using the Fab Filter Pro C. So I have like I had a Compex shootout. Like I tried to match it as much as possible so that when I go on the road, and I actually have like a little in the box mix template where I sat here and A/B'd a lot of my hardware choices that are real character choices and got them really close. And I did one of those mix things for mixing with waves things, where I had to go in and recreate a 100% in the box mix of something that I had done in front of an auditorium full of people. And the mix sounded good, man. It sounded different. I could A/B it with what was on the record and go, yeah, I can hear the difference, but if I think about it honestly, and I'm really honest with myself and think, would you hand that mix in, the other mix, the in the box mix to the label? Would you actually hand that in? Absolutely. I wasn't embarrassed by it. It was good work. You know, I used my ears. You know, whether it took me longer or not, I got there. I got the end results. So, you know, use what you have, but be inspired and make sure you know what it does. And you know, that's kind of just the philosophy of being able to reach it for all this stuff.
Absolutely, man. And you mentioned a couple of amazing plugins there earlier on. So with Oak Sound Sooth 2, which I use as well, which is phenomenal, and Sound Theory Gullfoss. I've talked to a few engineers about Sound Theory Gullfoss, and they're going, "Oh, I've never come across that." But do you enjoy using that particular plugin? Have you used it?
I do, and they just did an update too, and they've been in touch with me under the hood. Of course, you know, when something like that comes out, I go to NAMM and I walk right up to the booth. I introduce myself. I name drop. I give them the whole resume, the whole sales pitch. Not because I want free plugins, because I want to be their best friend. I want early access to be able to brainstorm with these guys and talk about things that I want in the roadmap. And they're a great company. And Eddie over there, those guys are brilliant. If you really read a deep theory about how that plugin works, it actually works on the perception of human hearing. They employed more just as much psychology as they did audio science to that plugin. And there were some things that I didn't love about the top end. So I'd always just sort of pull back so that nothing was affected above 4 or 6K, and just kind of leave the top end that I had created in my mix and not overhype it over there. Sure. And they've done a new variation. It's like an update. Maybe it's version 2 or whatever. Yeah. And I actually don't mind what it's doing all the way up. And I haven't handed a mix in with it. I've honestly just updated in the last week or two, but I'm playing with it over here and really getting to know it and checking it in a few different reference fields. It's just a really wonderful plugin. I mean, it just eliminates a little bit of the extra fatigue and mud in your mix, possibly, you know?
I agree. Yeah,
it's like, I'll get a great mix and it's punchy and it's stuff, but if, you know, as soon as I put that on, it just clears it up just a little bit. I've never gone into parameters beyond about 25% or 25. I think it goes to 200. So that's probably 15, you know, or whatever, 12.5%. But you know, it's always better. You know, if I just bypass the Gullfoss wherever I have it, if I've been listening through it, now I just mix through it. Like I'll actually get the fundamentals of my mix up. I'll start listening to it. And then why not? I'll just start cleaning it up already, you know, right away before I'm riding faders and doing, you know, adding effects and stuff. And it's like, it's such a nice tool for just adding that extra bit of sort of clarity to what you're doing. And I feel like I'm making quicker, better decisions through it. And, you know, the effects tails that I'm riding, I'm hearing the tails better. I really have a grasp of how the overheads are ringing out in a you know, on a drum kit, or it really is kind of sort of just a magical go-to that I just, dial up a little bit and just leave on the 2-mix bus and never really address it or change it again,
Absolutely. I find it really useful for my mastering chain, but also as well, you mentioned Brainworks earlier on. So very honored and blessed. I put my name, I think, in a hat pretty much on the Plugin Alliance forum on Facebook, and Dirk got in contact, says, yeah, do you want to try out the new BX True Peak limiter? And I got to try it out before a load of other people. And man, I don't know if you've tried it out yet, but that True Peak limiter by Brainworks, the new one, man, it's great.
Yeah,
I
love it. It's really, really great. I got an early look at it as well too under the hood. And yeah, it's my favorite in the box limiter right now.
Yeah.
I previously really liked Stephen Massey's L2007, which I still love, and some of the wave stuff, but this is this just preserves the transients a little extra, I mean, you can still get carried away with it and turn everything into mush, but
yeah, easily.
I mean, as you can with anything else.
Yeah.
I feel like, in a mastering world too, it's mixing is a competitive thing. People are always comparing your first mixes up against mastered music out in the workspace. We're always trying to hand in things that are relatively smashed to the client for their approval, and then I'll back it off to hand it to you to master. And, we get into a lot of trouble if we're using, if we're using limiters that are removing transient peaks and responses and mixing into that, and then give it to somebody who has better transient control, and then they deliver their master that's louder than what I handed out, but the snare is out of perspective now, or the kick, the attack on the kick is out of perspective, and the client's like, did the mastering guy turn the drums up? And it's like this weird thing where I actually, honestly, if I'm just going to be honest, in the modern age,
of course,
rather than limit my mixes, sometimes I'll just clip them.
Fair enough.
I just clip them and send them out, and because I know that's irresponsible to deliver as a master, but I know that it's got more, my transient responses are more intact that way than any limiter. And then a real mastering engineer's results are going to be similar to that. Since I've gotten this BX limiter, I'm not clipping the output. I'm actually just using that limiter, and and watching that I don't turn everything into mush, backing it off when it starts to get a little mushy, and then the mastering when there is a clear bit of extra headroom and transient punch. It's always nice that the mastering process is noticed by the client and everybody else, like, yay, I always like the idea that everything we do is supposed to get better and better. And then for a while, with the volume wars that we ad nauseum about and stuff, everybody was just frying their 2 mixes so much that it was just like this path of destruction. And it was, some people destroyed stuff all along, and then the mastering, if they backed it off, cleaned it up, like I said, things would change in perspective, and I think it's kind of a bit more of an even playing field for us mix engineers to have some technology to not get fired off a mix gig, and to leave some room for the mastering engineer to do their magic, because that's always my favorite process, is to get a foreign set of ears on everything. And then just check in with my sanity once in a while and go, hey, I just ran a new IR on my room correction software for the Genelec speakers, or we just changed this. Like, am I out to lunch? How's my bottom end? How's, I like the consult of a great mastering engineer. And so that, having better tools like the BX limiter as a mix engineer is kind of giving me that back, honestly.
That's so amazing, man. So talking about mastering engineers, we had Bob Olson on last week. I understand that Bob has been to your studio recently.
Bob's an old friend, I mean, Bob actually helped me design.
He's amazing.
He actually helped me design the echo chamber. I mean, when we knew we were going to dig a 20-foot hole in the parking lot, it's like, who do you call? And so I called Bob, and I was, like, hey, Bob, we're going to build a replica Abbey Road 2's echo chamber under the parking lot. It doesn't have to be an exact replica. We're just kind of stealing that because everybody loves the sound of that chamber.
Yeah.
What should we do? And he hit me to Keen cement. He was like, you got to use Keen cement instead of plaster. It'll sustain a lot longer, and it's even more reflective. And he gave me some really great ideas. And I think that the mic placement configuration was also Bob's, where we actually put a figure eights in the corner and null the corners, and null the path in front of the corners. So it's kind of picking up the side reflections of the room. So yeah, Bob's been here probably, we have a secret engineers hang here every once in a while where we just, invite all the engineers in town, and Bob's certainly part of that congregation of mine. So yeah, Bob's been here quite a bit, and he's a good friend.
He's lovely guys. He was telling us the story about, don't know if you caught any of it, about Motown Records back in the 60s. And,
I'm sure I've probably gotten all the Bob stories by now. I'm not sure.
I'm sure you have.
I've known him for about 10 years on a pretty monthly basis. We actually meet and congregate. So, but he's always got new stories. So what a wealth of information and knowledge. And, he's not, typically you meet some older engineers that came up through the 50s and 60s and 70s. Their knowledge kind of stops at analog, whereas Bob is really smart about DSP technology and the current state of affairs. There's somebody that kept very current, and so yeah, Bob's definitely a treasure. Nashville's lucky to have him. We're the engineering community's lucky to have him.
Absolutely, man. He's such a fantastic guest. Tell us as well, David, about the speakers that you use as well in the studio. So what's your speaker setup?
So I use the Genelec ones, the 8351s.
Yeah.
Here, and then I have these guys are going to kill me. I don't know the model that I have in Studio A, but I have the bigs. I have the I have to look it up. We'll have to look it up. So I track on the bigs in there as well too. And then I have like a pair of like 8050s, I think, in there for nears as well too. I'm a convert. Absolutely. I was on Dyne Audios for 15 years, and I was when I built this mix room, I thought, okay, I'm going to break the Dyne habit here, and I'm going to try. There isn't really a set of small near fields that on the planet Earth that I can't afford. Even if I have to sell a car, I'm mixing for a living, I should have the best speakers for me. Yeah. And I went down this rabbit hole that drove the Vintage King guys nuts, because they brought over every speaker that has ever been made. I think I had 15 sets of near fields being dropped off every second day. So I had the Focals and the Barefoots and the PMCs and just everything. I wanted to hear everything in my room. And I made the mistake of leaving my safety net up. So I had the new, whatever I was listening to. Then I had my Dynes that I've been mixing on for 15 years. So of course, everything that I switched over to whatever the new speaker that was competing with, it sounded foreign to me. It caused me panic. And then when I went to the Dynes, there was this whole mid-range thing that existed that wasn't existing in the other speakers. And for the first while, I kept saying, for the first 4 or 5 speakers that came in here, they don't have the mid-range that the Dynes have. They're missing. There's something filtered. Yeah. And then after about 9 sets of speakers, I realized that it was my Dynes that had a pronounced mid-range that I had gotten used to. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but, I felt the need to, on other speakers, like boost mid-range, that I wouldn't necessarily reach for, like mud, like from 250 to 400 or something. Like it was like this weird thing. I wanted to fill guitars and vocals in with this thing. And so I literally bailed. I just kind of sent everything back. I didn't like any of the speakers, and I kept mixing for a year or two on my Dynes. And then Paul Stewart and John, it wasn't John Whitcore, he's there now, but Paul Stewart came. Yeah, it was John Whitcore, of course. He was back there. Sorry, I'm spinning out.
That's cool, man.
They came to Nashville. They wanted to kind of like show some Genelec speakers. I was like, sure, no problem. They brought the ones in here, and we set them up, and I switched to them. And in the first 4 minutes, I hated them. I was like,
Really?
I hate them. I hate them. And then minute 5, I was like, wow, there's a real thump. There's like some bottom end that I didn't know was in this mix. And I'm hearing, even though I'm a little older and probably have like a roll off at 15K, I'm hearing some real, like more definition, but I still kind of hated him. And I switched to the Dines, and I was like, okay, there's my mix, but I'm not hearing that bottom and top thing. Maybe it's masked in these. And I started to really question that. And they were the first sort of speaker company that were like, we're leaving these here. We're going to leave them here for 6 weeks. And I had just started a project. I wasn't in the middle of mixing anything. Yeah. And I said to my engineer, take my Dines away. I don't want a safety net. I'm going to start a record on these. I'm going to build the tracks and the beat in this room. I'm going to co-write the songs with the artists in this room. We're going to cut our scratch vocals. We're going to cut our good vocals. Yep. I'm going to go do the tracking date in A. I'm going to bring them back here, and I'm going to mix on these in B. And that's all it took. As soon as I did that on these, I can hear, you know, with the concentric speakers, the top end, the mids, and the built-in bottom with no sub under my desk, and I'm hearing 25 to 40 hertz, you know, like I'm hearing it here in the chair, all being delivered at the exact same time and place, you know, it's coming from the cabinet. And it was no contest when I switched back to the Dines. You know, after about 2 weeks, I called those guys and said, okay, you know, let's make a deal. You know, I wanted, they left the bigs in A and they left these in here. And I'm like, okay, let's play owner now. How do I own these? You know, and I signed a deal with the devil.
Fair enough.
No, they're not the devil. They're great. I'm back on it. When I actually came to town, I had a little set of Genelecs that were kind of in my backpack, and I was honestly mixing on them. You know, like I'd go into some of the rooms that would have NS10s and other things, and I'd put them up, and I wouldn't be able to blast them to the back of the room, but I knew what I was hearing on them. So there is a Genelec thing, like people who walk in that are like PMC guys or barefoot guys or blah, 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 go, these sound really weird for a few minutes, you know? And then honestly, if they hang out for about a half an hour and people acclimate to the sound of these speakers, there's a thing. And like Genelec people are Genelec people. I know Jeff Balding's a Genelec guy. I know Sylvia Massey's loving her Genelecs as well. So we all, you know, it's a thing. Speakers, everybody, you know, like chooses their speakers. It's a hard thing. I've really only had a relationship with 2 sets of speakers. This is the second set, and I really rely on them. I really know what I'm hearing. Once I got used to them in this room, I still go for a drive and check my mixes. I still listen to them on my home system. The difference is there's no voiceman notes. I'm not making any tweaks or changes in the outside world. I'm coming back, and I really feel like I'm hearing what I'm doing.
That's amazing. It's cool, man. I love the speakers I've listened to or used as well as like NS10s, like everyone down, and everyone jokes about NS10s and goes, oh, they're the crappiest speakers in the world. And the next minute it's like kind of everyone's still using them so they can try and get the best, you know, because I suppose I'm guessing the argument is if it sounds great on NS10s, then technically it should sound great on all speaker systems, but I don't know how true the argument is. But then again, I've been to a studio, my friend Chris's studio in Manchester, a studio called Oscillate, where it's ATCs, and the ATCs that he's got, man, are just phenomenal. But I've heard some great Adam speakers as well.
I mean, they're all great, you know. And I mean, honestly,
so many good companies out there.
Greg Wells is a PMC guy, so when he comes to the studio, we have the PMC rep bring a bunch of PMCs over. I have other friends that use different speakers. That's, you know, just we bring your speakers over, set them up. It's all good. When I'm working here, I'm working on the Genelecs. They're just they're home for me, and I'm here listening to music and making music on them. You know, 10 hours a day, 362 days a year for 10 years. You know, I've heard, I suck at math, but like, you know, thousands and thousands of songs
Yeah.
on these speakers. So it's just what I know, and
Absolutely.
there is no best or better at this point. There's just
No.
sort of like, what do you know? What do you make the best decisions on? And
Completely.
I know mixers that mix on some unconventional speakers whose work I love,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about, from what I've learned from speaking to other pros and yourself included, is what I've been taught over the last couple of years. It's all about coloration. Everyone hears color in a different way, and there's I don't know how many billion people are on this planet, but everyone's got a different pair of ears, so we all hear music differently, and it's really interesting. But how do you look after, I've asked loads of engineers this question, David, but I'll ask you as well, how do you look after your ears when you listen to so much music every day?
I mix quiet. I start really loud, and then the duration of the foundation of the mix is done at speaking volume.
Okay.
And if I can make a mix punchy and exciting and jump out of the speakers and clear at a lower volume, then I check it really loud. They're little checkpoints about every hour. I just crank the shit out of it and listen to it really loud, see if something's hurting, maybe needs a little soothe, maybe needs a little bit of EQ. What's not gelling really loud? What's pushing the drivers in the speakers? How is my bottom end? And then after I do that blast and make a decision or two there, I always walk out of the room. I don't just sit there and then go back to quiet. I've spent 2 minutes with it, red lighting my monitors. Now it's time to go visit a friend in the parking lot, or go for a walk around the block, or grab a coffee, or just get out of it. I don't sit in that environment for long periods of time. I track really loud. Honestly, tracking dates are pretty. We have the bigs raging, and it's just kind of that adrenaline fun part of the experience. And I toured for 20 years as a guitar player with Marshall cabinets behind me as well too. So I'm shocked that I still have the hearing that I have. I don't know why. I don't have any major dips or anything. I know I have a shelf probably around 15K, but to live this long. Also, as a 20-year-old mixer many years ago, I don't think I ever fiddled around above 15K with anything. If I found myself doing that while mixing, something's wrong, maybe adding a little air to the mix bus. Like I have a Moog Airband at 40K that I just have one notch up, just because I kind of subliminally like what it does, but I'm not microscopically listening above 15K. I'm just not, I think that the mic choices I use are usually, below that anyway, to a certain extent,
Absolutely, man. So the Moog stuff is amazing. Absolutely love the Moog stuff. Headphones as well. Do you tend to check anything under headphones, or not that often?
I have headphones laying around. For being such a tracking musician, I have different relationships with different things, and headphones for me are such a tracking tool. They've never really been a mixing tool. I usually sit in front of a set of speakers. I played around with the Waves, Ocean Way control room emulation, and actually went in and did a little promo with them and some friends over at Ocean Way. Alan Sides and the Waves guys asked me to be a part of that. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty cool. I maybe it's just because it's a novelty, but I've been playing with that on headphones when I'm working at home, and just messing around and mixing and things like that. And so I've been enjoying that as, if I have to be on headphones, I've been playing with that, and your results will vary. I don't know that I've made any final decisions in that environment yet, but I haven't gotten it here to the studio and backed off a bunch of stuff and went, oh man, you're not hearing anything. It's quite the contrary. I think I'm actually making good decisions along the way, and everything I've done in that environment seems to stick. Of course, I'll tweak little things along the way. You change one thing, it's a house of cards. You change the bass guitar, the kick drum bottom end relationship of the mix is different. So, once you get into the minutia of the fine detail of mixing, then things are going to change.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, David. And question I've got to ask you about being a fellow guitarist is, obviously you've got some amazing amps at your studio. What are your thoughts and feelings on amp simulations? Have you come across any that you like, or like the Helix, or
Yeah,
anything along those lines?
I've got a Helix LT and I've got a Kemper, and
Yeah.
I think that it's amazing technology. If I were still touring as a live guitarist, there's not a chance in hell I'd be lugging around amplifiers or trying to arrange backline on fly dates. I mean, it would all be 100% Kemper in the ears every night. I had the luxury of touring with some of the greatest amps in the world, and sometimes you get to a venue and the power would be on a generator at a venue, and the amp would sound like shit, or somebody'd move a mic, or the backline mic was bashed in, or something was bad, or it's like my odds were, I feel like they were 65% that I was happy in my ears, and the rest of the time I was fiddling and moving mics and smacking on the top of amps and trying to just figure out how to make myself happy. And I'm a little spoiled. I just do sort of one-offs and just fly dates and stuff now. And I've taken a Kemper out. I'll sit in the studio, and the thing that's cool about the Kemper that far exceeds amplifiers for live is I can use ribbon mics in figure of 8 through Neve preamps with a little bit of compression to catch the model. You know, it's more like a full realized studio tone that I have out playing live. Whereas those aren't the best choices for feeding back in a line array or, arena. You're stuck with a Heil or a 57 or something, and you make the best of it. But, I do a lot of modeling for musicians that come and record with me, and then want to capture the amp settings that we used on the record so that they can take them out and tour live. I've also done a few records where guitar players on demos and things, where they just bring in a Kemper, and if they're a great player, it's amazing. It's fantastic. It's great. I'm not a naysayer at all. I will say that if I have a heavily layered production that has a lot of different kinds of guitars and guitar tones on a track, if they're all done through the same technology, whether it's a Kemper or a Helix, I have trouble fitting it all and making it uniquely speak in a mix. But the same way I'd have trouble if the guy used the same Fender amp on 10 or 15 tracks. The luxury I have with this whole thing is we can do a Les Paul and a Plexi with a 12. We can do a Fender Super with a Stratocaster on this track. We can do a Les Paul Jr. with the P90 through a Showman and this little, Supro amp on this track. And so having with different mics, and different things on them at all times. And I know that you can get into the modeling aspects of that a little deeper. But the reason why I still have a lot of amps kicking around is for that sort of instant, sort of organic variety of things. But for me, traveling or going anywhere, doing production camps or working, I took a Kemper to New York and worked at the power station for Glenn Rosenstein 2 years ago. And everybody's super happy with the tracks. Nobody is like, just not digging the Kemper. Nobody's actually saying that, I mean, it really comes down to me. It really comes down to me being a clever enough guitar player to come up with an interesting part and play it well.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much, though, David. That's so cool. We're going to move on to the last section, if that's cool with you, sir. We've got some questions that have been sent through to you directly. So just going to have a quick look on those now. So let's have a quick look. Okay, so we've had Douglas Edwards sent a message through to you. So he said, how has Nashville Music Row Studios changed from 1980s golden years, but now post-home studio revolution? Many famous studios have gone Music Row, not Music Row. So just wondering how you've seen things change over the years from the 80s, with the golden years with Music Row Studios.
I've heard stories. I've only really been in Nashville for about the last 10 or 15 years. And it's changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. I know that in the 80s and 90s, it was mostly country music. I mean, honestly, even in the 2000s when I was making records, I had my eye on LA and New York a lot more than Nashville, because I was like, they film Hee Haw in Nashville. They got the Grand Ole Opry. I wasn't really a country music guy, you know. I was
Sure.
definitely a rock guy, and pop, and so, you know, I don't think I think Nashville has, of course, it's certainly changed, and the Music Row studios are mostly gone, but we still have Ocean Way and Sound Emporium and Universal and even Addiction here. But what you've seen change is these are a lot of the studios of this sort of size are private production studios, like Sputnik Studios down the street. It's Vance Powell and Mitch Dane. Addiction Studios is me. You know, in many ways, Blackbird Studios is John McBride. It's his relationships. It's his curated gear collection. You know, I mean, it's still one of the world's greatest commercial studios that you can rent out. But I feel like the studios have become people's private creative space. And there are more creatives curating recording studios. A lot of artists have amazing studios. Sheryl Crow has an amazing studio in her house. Keith Urban now has Sheryl Crow's old 8068 console in his house. Has an amazing studio in his house. Vince Gill has a world-class studio in his house. You know, Peter Frampton has the Fool on the Hill. We have this place. So what I find is, like, when I'm working with Vince Gill, I get to drive out to his beautiful house and sit in his beautiful studio and work with him, or I invite him into my workspace. So it's changed in essence where, hey, let's book Columbia Studio A to go work on this record for a couple of days. The commercial rooms aren't necessarily getting as much work, I think, as the curated people with big spaces like this, who have our own relationships with artists and people in the music industry. And they become more of a creative environment where we're not just, you know, you got to pay by the hour to be here. We're writing songs here. We're having dinner parties here. Like I said before, this whole environment has kind of become a lifestyle for music makers. So the home studios are amazing. They actually help out. When you have an artist that has a SM7 and Apollo and they make really cool tracks in Ableton, I think that there's so much of that being generated of people who now need me. They need to bring their tracks here and cut some real drums and maybe mix it from like a mix engineer's perspective.
Absolutely.
Like, people go, the home studio is killing the bigger studio. And it's like, well, I have to embrace the culture of music making now when I own a big studio. And now this studio is filled full of those music makers. Yesterday, I had some of the top songwriters on the planet Earth in Studio A, 3 laptops, 2 Ableton rigs, a couple of keyboards, you know, and wanting to put real drums on stuff and play a real Fazioli grand piano and sort of staying integrated and not being sort of having a defeatist idea. Like there are obstacles and roadblocks in every generation. My grandfather heard rock and roll and said it was over. My father's generation heard, you know, Edgar Winter's synthesizer on Frankenstein and went, that's it. You know, machines making music, it's over. You know, it's the forward-thinking people like Bob Olson or me, you know, starting to work and program in Ableton that comes from a real guitar. I come from a rock band world, you know, but I love technology and I embrace those music makers and I bring them into a world where it's a level above what they can do at home, but they're generating content with the need for that. You know, I mean, everybody goes, Billie Eilish and Phineas created that album, you know, in their bedroom. The big studios are dead. They actually mixed it in big rooms on SSLs and took it to mastering engineers. You know,
of course they did. Yeah, of course they
did. It's all good. You know, I will say one thing about sort of championing people that are coming up in this, you know, not coming up in what I came up in, is that I have a lot of colleagues, peers, friends that have been in the industry as long as I have and maybe dropped out or never made it, are more talented than me, that have a better work ethic than me, that have just as much need and want for this, drive for it and passion, and never made it. And the only difference between me and them is how is my perspective, on rejection and failure. And that's not just personal, that's the whole music industry. Some of them are like, music industry's dead, electronic music sucks, people don't make music anymore, it's soulless. Go find some soul, find some music that you love and that you can breathe into. I work with a young, 17-year-old artist that comes in with an Ableton session. And the second that I get it, I add room noise to the recording. I actually put up room mics and just put hiss. I put HVAC sounds or outside noise and birds on it, and then put like a real drum track on it and bury it below all the 808s and rock and pop production.
Yeah.
And their minds are blown. They're like, why does this track feel so amazing? And it's like, I'm here to use all of my faculties to, bring the history of what I've known into the modern evolution of music.
Absolutely.
And so music studio is a long answer to a question that was sort of triggered by the state of studios.
That's good, man.
Definitely shifted in Nashville, but it's shifted globally. It's shifted in LA. It's shifted in New York. It's shifted, and people who are understanding the ability to utilize their space creatively, not just to do one thing, but to do all things, are prospering and doing just fine.
Yeah.
Now, the real estate industry in Nashville has killed everything. I mean, they've mowed Music Row down. They put condos up everywhere. There's like another 300,000 people in town in the last 10 years. All our historic studios are being bulldozed or at risk of it. It kind of sucks. But Dave Cobb rescued RCA Studio A. Quad Studios is still, it's a private studio now, but it's sort of functioning. We've still got Sound Emporium Ocean Way and there's studios that have come and gone in the last decade. It's to have a blank commercial studio where people used to go book, that's becoming much, much more difficult, not just for Nashville, for everywhere else.
Completely agree with you. Really interesting as well as the when we were off the stream, when you met one of our moderators, Luke. We're actually going into a studio in Manchester. As I was telling you, our friend Chris runs a studio called Oscillate, and Luke was there going, "Oh, I'm recording it." You talk about recording at home. Luke's like, "Oh, I'm recording at home, but yeah, I'm struggling. I want to go into a proper commercial studio with vibe." And there's this beautiful Neve console desk there, loads of outboard gear, and we're going there for the vibe because we know that if we go to a studio like that, then we're going to have fun and we're going to get the vibe. Someone's just commented as well, David, said that the vibe and the atmosphere in a commercial purpose-built studio is so different to the home studio world as well. So maybe I'm guessing artists walk into you and go, "You know what, David, the vibe in this place is amusing. Let's just create." Whereas they might not get that at home.
I don't know how it came off on the little video tour, but that's a perfect exact comment. Yeah. I've had so many people that have discovered working over here for their first time after being in all the major commercial studios, and they're like, they don't care if I have a Fairchild across my 2 mix. They talk about the people. They check in a month after we've done the record and say, "How's Ethan and Alberto? Hey man, we want to drop by and just come say hello. Are you guys working today?" And they mention the candles. We have like these beautiful Baltic amber candles throughout the studio. They love the couches. They always comment on that, and the chandeliers and the lighting and the spread. We always have food laid out, and this is home. This is a home studio, as ridiculous as that sounds and as elaborate as this, building is.
Sure.
Aside from the gear curation and large format consoles, there's a lot of home here, and definitely. That is the new trend. Artists want to, artists that translate from working at home to coming into a commercial studio that feels like a dentist's office, that's all sterilized and clean, and it's got LED or crappy lighting, and it's like they're being charged by the hour, and every hour means something, and they're in and out. It's a cold, weird process, and this is definitely about everybody I work with. This is about adding to our community. Yeah. It really is. And if it feels, absolutely. It's not work for hire. literally the difference, in a commercial studio gets a phone call and they go, Wednesday, we need to cut vocals. We need to cut them from noon till 5 p.m. Is your room available? And they say, no, it's not. It's booked. Okay, thank you. Click. They phone the next room. 12 till 5. We need to cut vocals. Nope, not available. No sweat. They call the next room. Yep, we're available. They book it. I don't get calls like that. I literally, every artist I work with is in a community collaborative sense. And they're literally like, hey, we're gearing up to do some work. What looks good? Let's get our calendars out. Let's make this work. Like, this environment is the least negotiable thing.
Yeah.
All this gear is negotiable. They don't care what I choose or what I use.
No.
This is my personal gear curation of 30 years. They don't even necessarily a lot of the time guess which mic I choose in a vocal shootout. I'll always ask them if they enjoyed singing on one more than another. And if they did, that's the one that wins.
Yeah.
Their performance it means everything to me, but where they're performing is a beautiful environment. It's well lit. The staff are and the people around here are people, and part of a community. And this is when you come over here, you can throw your stuff all over the place and just hang out. There's no clock on the wall. We're just a project. We're here to make music and make the song the best it can be. And that, I think, is kind of the model to move forward. If you want to have a space, you have to be, you got to be the curator of it. You have to build those relationships with the music makers that come into your space and make them feel that they're your part of your community. Otherwise, that cold call, work for hire, go down a list thing, you're not building a career that way. And if you notice that, even if you're just independently looking for work as a tracking engineer or something, you need to start to notice that stuff early in your career. If you're just a number on a list, or if people are really trusting you to create a vibe and an atmosphere with them. I learned early, there's a good friend of mine, Scott Baggett, producer. I just throwing names out, that I worked with early. He would rent a studio, and, a lot of producers' cartage, like my cart, this big rack actually rolls. Like a company will come in, they'll wheel this rack out, take it over to Blackbird, and it'll show up wherever I'm tracking. Scott's cartage was lamps, throw rugs, candles, tables. It was like this whole furniture thing where he'd just come in and just like change the vibe of the studio where he went.
That's interesting.
And man, that really stuck with me, because I'd work with him in rooms I had worked in that I hated before, and I liked working.
That's really interesting you say that, because all been well, I should be, as a mastering engineer, I should be moving into a new space in August, and the space for clients to come in and sit down on a sofa. But I'm there thinking, what vibe could I kind of put in the room as well? Bearing in mind, my mastering engineers, they just want to maybe do some, just have a listen to like what I'm doing for them. And but absolutely, man, it's just having that creative environment. It's like you said, if the space is very kind of, I don't know how to put it, but if it's not the right vibe, whether you're mastering, mixing, recording, whatever, then it's hard to be creative, though, isn't it? I think, really, to be fair.
And so, like, how big is your mastering space?
The mastering space, I'd probably say 2 meters by about 4 meters, I would say.
And is there like a lounge area or anything that's attached to it?
What's cool? Well, the complex itself, it's like I don't know what it translates to in dollars, but it's like a £5 million complex.
Wow.
But there's a studio next door, and it's near a country park as well. So like kind of people can go to walks on a country park, but also there's a TV studio there as well.
It sounds like an amazing community opportunity. If you want to build a community and a vibe that makes people want to drop by and hang out, is make friends with the studio and make friends with the other people in the complex, and have a monthly client listening mix and mingle party and celebrate the records you make.
That's cool, man. I mean,
we do that with publishers all the time, where we get a couple of publishers that have songwriting teams that mingle together, and we just order a bunch of pizzas and invite a bunch of songwriters over and play the music that we've written over the studio loudspeakers and light the candles and dim the lights, and everybody just gets to hang out and celebrate. And I guarantee you, literally every time we do that, for about 2 months, I get texts from those songwriters going, we got to write, we got to hang out, we got to blah, blah, blah. Hey, could I book some time at the studio? I want to work on a track. You know, it just, if you create that sort of sense of community, that we're not here doing a utilitarian job for X amount of money, that this really is about us elevating and celebrating the music that we're making. And really, you know, the most important thing for me is to make sure that I am accessible to independent music makers that don't have the budget to be in a space like this. I mean, I can let Shawn Mendes and Carrie Underwood Records pay the bills over here while I find young, amazing talent and co-write and create and try to elevate the next generation of music makers and help get them on the map. And I've been very lucky in Nashville. You know, I always have like 1 or 2 artists on my radar that I start collaborating with, and then end up with really long-term collaborations. You know, look up Amy Peters' music, and she's featured in a lot of the Avid stuff that we did together, promoting Carbon. And that's her room upstairs. And you know, she was a Blackbird Academy graduate. And we started writing together, and we've been a long time collaborator. And I'm, you know, super proud of the music that we've done together. And it's turned into all kinds of other community things and a music scene. And every person has their own scene. You connect those people and put yourself in the center of that scene, then you've got a massive scene.
Absolutely. I love that. That's, you know, and what it's crazy to think about with the community. When we first started with Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer back in November, we just literally just started with 3 friends. And David, I love the word community, and you keep saying it over and over and again, and it's just that's what
Nashville is. That's why it won. That's why, you know, what you've seen on Facebook is what happens to engineers, musicians, songwriters, people who are truly in this for the love and passion of creating something and the betterment of themselves. What happened to your Facebook group is what happens when you move to Nashville. Seriously, like, it sounds a little bizarre or like an ad for Nashville, but man, I was a world traveler. I was trying to live in New York. I was trying to live in San Francisco. I was trying to live in LA. I was touring. I was working on all of these other things. And when I stuck around Nashville long enough to be welcomed into this community for the work and the kindness of them and being a good hang and being of like-minded, once I actually started to have anchors in this community, it was like, I can never leave here. This is grown in and of itself. It's given me a career. It's given me work. It's given me a studio. It's given me a life, you know, that isn't just sort of chasing job to work to being in a cooler band and a better thing and trying to get this band a record deal. I'm still trying to get bands record deals. Like I said, I'm working at the ground level. I'm finding new indie artists. If you look on my Instagram, you know, I have a releases tab, and there's like Leah Green there's Brooke Hadala. These are really young artists that are amazing storytellers and songwriters. I hope they're the future Katy Perry's and stars. I work with an artist, Tennille Towns, who is on Sony, and she's touring on the biggest levels and has had some success. But, you know, she was 16 years old and just hanging around Nashville with her parents and just hanging around the studio, writing 200 songs and doing demos and work tapes and making sure that that's what this is about. You know? It's not about, you know, just grabbing the work for hire money, because, man, you cash that check to your rent and it goes away and you're chasing that forever. But when you build careers for people, when you reach out and champion the people around you, and your community and career gets bigger and bigger with them, it actually just serves as a completely different mechanism for success.
Absolutely agree with you, man. And thank you so much for saying that as well. It's just, I think what I'd love to maybe do at some point, maybe have you on, and so maybe Bob and some other Nashville guys and girls, maybe some indie artists as well, but maybe just have a whole group of guys and girls from Nashville maybe on a PMFC chat, and we could all maybe just hang and just chat about what's going on in Nashville. That would be amazing. I'd love that, man.
Discovering like the greatest music makers in the world, the greatest producers are people that you haven't heard of yet. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, it's like, you know, it's easy for us to just name drop the career resume stuff that I have, but honestly, people go, what are you most excited about working on right now? And there might be like a name drop in there. There might be a big record that's on my plate, but usually the response is you haven't heard of them yet.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, we're doing something here. It's the song I wrote last Tuesday. That's what I'm most excited about. It's not the Journey record I did 10 years ago that gave me some accolades or whatever. I mean, once the record's hanging on the wall, I'm so grateful for it. It's so great. But there's just so many people out there. My favorite music is me Shazamming stuff at the Kroger, you know, because it's like on the speakers and I'm like, who's this artist? My playlists are all that. My favorite producers are some of the people that are, you know, in sync, you know, and I'll be on like Grey's Anatomy or something and I'll Shazam that and go, oh, wow, and discover a whole world. Reese Sinclair, just to throw her name out. I don't know her at all. Before I saw her chatting on your forum, she's one of the great, so unbelievable with like sounds and inspiration and mood and using pedals and effects and layers and music production. Music production for me, I was just always a fan of great record making. And so it wasn't just about high quality recordings. It was about mood setting and interesting records that had Foley and talking and bells ringing, you know, like Pink Floyd records and Beatles records and stuff like that, you know. And then records that where you can really hear the room, you know, like The Stairwell and When the Levee Breaks for Led Zeppelin, and sort of and honestly, in Billie Eilish records, when you can hear a matchstick light and that becomes part of the beat, you know, Bjork, the movie Dancer in the Dark, the Bjork movie. I mean, the soundtrack to that Bjork movie is amazing, where there's machinery in a factory that becomes the rhythmic mechanism for the music that's about to play. It is such a masterful art piece, and so of course everybody can just name their favorite producers as like the top guys, the Max Martins and stuff. Super fan of that as well. Of course, love everything Mutt Lange ever did. But you got to really, to find inspiration, you know, you got to find music makers that are doing their own thing and pushing an envelope and creating an atmosphere and a mood that belongs to them. And, you know, and I can find that. Amazingly enough, I love technology because I can find that on Instagram and find a producer like Ree and just go down a rabbit hole and just absorb everything that's happening, even on little video clips and stuff, and then add Spotify playlists. And so that's literally 98% of the music I listen to now is just like new music I'm discovering on a daily basis. Then when I go for a long drive, I'm put Synchronicity on and relive the 80s for a minute and love how out of tune the vocals are and how raw that track is. And, you know, or whatever, you know, but moving forward into this music making thing on a daily basis, really just trying to find your own imprint. And when you can include that with what it is you do, then you're not replaceable.
Yeah. Completely agree with you. We need to get Rhea on as well. I'd love to have a chat with what she's doing as well. It's amazing. We're talking to Urko, another awesome engineer, on Wednesday, and obviously we're talking about hip hop for a while, but then all of a sudden he went, "Oh yeah, listen to alternative." I'm there going, "What, really?" And it's great because, like you said, you know, you can go on like Grey's Anatomy playlist or whatever. And I was messaging him there a couple of days, yesterday, and I said, "Oh, check out Royal Blood. You know, if you're into some of like the alternative bands with all their riffs that those guys are doing, which are blowing up in the UK." But I just love, like you said though, David, like the technology now with Shazam, the fact you can walk in a shop or you can literally just be watching TV or whatever, and you can just like go down a rabbit hole, man, and just like discover new music. It's
all
great.
It all comes around and it's cyclic. Like, you know, Black Holes and Revelations, the you know, the really my favorite Muse record.
Great album.
You know, Take a Bow, just the song Take a Bow. Just that, you know, is such amazing record making. It's everything from a band that sounds like Queen to EDM programming to mood to soundscapes. It's like early Pink Floyd meets everything that we've ever listened to with a completely unique new spin. It's got some Radiohead in it. It's got so much to listen to in that. And it's amazing to live long enough to hear things be recycled as new, where the origins are actually a little blurry. I had a songwriter come in once and load up a synth pad and start going, and I was like, oh, we can dance if we want to, and I started to sing like Men Without Hats, and she stopped and looked at me and went, what are you doing? And I went, oh, well, that's a safety dance. What's the safety dance? It's hilarious. And we go down this rabbit hole, and I show them the origins of where that came from, and it was innocent enough, but it's all, it's interesting because I don't think in the 1940s, people listened to music from, 1890 or 1880 or something,
no, of course not.
But now with technology, we've got teenagers listening to Ella Fitzgerald and Mars Volta and Sting and Billie Eilish and Katy Perry, and classic music is Britney Spears. Like that's classic music. But then they might have a Queen album and they know Bohemian Rhapsody, and it's like it's just sort of this boundless, amazing pool where it's undelegated and it's wide open, and you can make any record and any kind of sounding recording in any direction you want now. It's the least amount of restricted by anything. I think anything goes, and it's because we have access to it all just by asking our phone to play it out loud.
So that's really interesting. So do you reckon there are scenes anymore? Like there was the punk rock scene and there was the grunge scene.
I'm sure there are. Yeah, I mean, I might not have my, ear close enough to the ground on the street level of being an 18-year-old in this day and age, but I certainly work with artists. One day I'll have a 17-year-old pop artist here, and the next day I'll have a 70-year-old rock star here. And the cool thing is the pop artist knows the rock star's catalog and music, and the rock star loves what the pop guy's doing, and sometimes they want to collaborate. I don't think it used to kind of be like that. I think that even the older guys stuck to their genre or their thing, but like it's just all this cross pollinating networking amongst not just genres, but borders and scenes, and Spanish music making its way into pop music, into rock music, into all kinds of stuff. I've done some pretty amazing collaborations, even on soundtracks, where, an artist from one genre who's a completely different demographic is contributing to the same soundtrack that an old established pop rock guy and a roots guy, and then they find out each other's on the same soundtrack and get together and do something together, and there's some stuff coming out next year that is the result of that kind of workflow. That's a pretty amazing list of collaborators that just decided that they all loved what each other did, and then created something completely new out of it, with the influx of what's on the street now with what came, from 40 years ago.
Absolutely. It's just so much great music out there, man. So much great music. So before we go, any final words, David? Anything that you want to tell everyone?
I don't know, man. Just keep your head down and love what you're doing. I mean, if you have to make to-do lists to motivate yourself to stay engaged in this, you're in big trouble, man. I mean, it's, this compels me to stay up late and keeps me awake at night, and it gets me out of bed in the morning to jump back into things that I want to explore and do. So, it's got to be the motivating force, and that's whether you decide that to be a lawyer or a musician, just whatever navigates you through life, and pushes you along the way. is going to keep you completely invested and engaged.
Completely agree with you, David. Thank you so much for your time today. So, can you tell everyone your studio web address, where to go to?
Yeah, I think it's, geez, we're not really a commercial studio, so I think it's addictionsound.com.
Okay. And I've got kalmusky.com as well. Is that right?
Kalmusky.com.
And your Instagram is instagram.com/Kalmusky.
Addictionsound.com is the studio. Kalmusky, my last name is the @ for Instagram and Twitter. KALMUSKY.
Cool.
So make sure you follow me. The studio is Addiction Sound. So Instagram is @AddictionSound.
Yeah.
And that's that. I mean, just stay in touch online, see what we're up to. If there's young engineers that have questions, I do all kinds of stuff on my stories. We do mic shootouts, and I put polls out, and
Nice.
I try to engage in the audio community as much as possible. So
amazing, man.
Just everybody's welcome to just stay in touch with me on social media, and appreciate the invite. I'm just kind of a working class music maker, a musician, writer, new writer, and engineer and studio guy. And I've gotten to participate in some really cool things, but you're also, interviewing some legends too, man. So it's
exciting.
I feel like it's a little silly for us to even be talking here, but
No,
but I love the community that you've started, and I think it is sort of, it's connecting the dots from the indie, or even the beginning music maker to all the way up to the crazy legends that you're able to talk to, and I think that it's nice. It's amazing to have a platform and a community where we're all connected and we can discuss fun things. I have fun chatting on your threads. I always try to enter my workflows or ideas about things.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
You ask great questions, and it's just a great conversation starter. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm always loving being engaged in that. And if you want to, offline, send a little note about trying to recruit a little group hang, a little Nashville thing, and include some music makers or do something else.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Ask your viewers sort of what they'd want to see and or talk about. Maybe it's more music production than engineering. Maybe it's more artist stuff. Then we can kind of curate it and do something special from Nashville.
Oh, David, that'd be amazing, man. Thank you so much. So the community that David's talking about is our community, which is facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. So again, that's facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. But David Kalmusky, thank you so much, sir, for showing us around your studio. I've had an absolute blast today. Really enjoyed it. So feel free to stick around on the backstage area. And thank you for everyone watching today as well. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. Feel free to get engaged on the community. Feel free to drop David some messages as well and have a chat with him. And we'll see you guys soon. Oh, and check out our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. But David, thank you so much again today, sir. Really appreciate your time. It's great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. See you soon.